early on that using it irresponsibly could lead to...
Quick side note, it wasn't any of the stones that made Quicksilver that fast. It's because his dad's Magneto, and that's why Scarlet Witch exists as well. They both got the same X gene, essentially, so they were already like that. They just got kind of enhanced. Vision, who should have been white, like pure white, none of this red nonsense that they had Paul Bettany dressed up as. Don't get me wrong, he was brilliant at Vision. I like him, but should never have been red. Because if they're going to extend the franchise to carry on past the Infinity War and Thanos coming back, I don't know how they're going to square that one. Because he survived in the comics, by the way. He just got locked up, essentially, just imprisoned somewhere and controlled. Just kept away, not head lopped off. So I don't know who they're going to, unless they completely change the story arc for Kang. I think that's where they are going to be going. Now, if we could actually bend Kevin Feige's ear to figure out what he was thinking of doing with the rest, could be quite fun. And why are they going with Snipes again for Blade? Right, fair enough. Proven track record. It's been nearly 20 years since the last fucking Blade movie. Ugh. So bloody stupid going with these older actors. Still haven't seen that new one with David Harbour being Hellboy. And there's going to have to be a crossover in the next decade with the Avengers and the X-Men. That'll be fun watching that happen. Probably going to end in a couple of lawsuits, no doubt. They've already ruined Quicksilver.
branches in time or time loops. Spoiler alert, this is how he beats the bad guy and also how he fixes Infinity War. Not a MacGuffin. Actually factors into the plot, and more than that, it's the key to the thematic conflict between Dormammu, who thinks time is gross, and Strange, who's a big fan of the linear progression of time. Nice work, writers. And then, last and also least, is the Soul Stone, the devastatingly powerful artifact with the ability to single-handedly kill 28% of the franchise's female protagonists. I'm just kidding, I literally have no idea what this thing does because it's never explained. Thanos just needs it to complete the set and do the snapping. The Soul Stone could have been literally anything, because in the story, it was nothing. That's a MacGuffin, baby. In fact, a matched set of MacGuffins like the Infinity Stones is sometimes referred to as plot coupons, otherwise meaningless objects that you can trade in to advance the plot. If somebody needs to collect a set of things that are minimally useful on their own but will do something extremely impressive when they're all brought together, then that's definitely gonna happen because there's nothing else interesting you can do with them. And when I say minimally useful, I'm including things like powers up the bad guy, because honestly, the plot was probably gonna do that on its own anyway. In fact, this is a useful segue into some categorization. See, even though MacGuffins are functionally interchangeable, there is some interesting subdivision within that trope. For instance, the power-up MacGuffin is an object that powers up the holder, makes them stronger, glowier, floatier, maybe a little more evil. This is just a way to make the bad guy an intimidating boss fight when they get their hands on the MacGuffin in the third act. And yeah, for whatever reason, the heroes basically never use this. Maybe it's an evil power-up or something. Now, I think it's important to note that this doesn't apply to magic weapons or magical choosy artifacts. Those things are useful on their own merit and have a function beyond initiating conflict. Power-up MacGuffins basically just enable a villain's third act power-up, which is a fairly standard Diabolus Ex Machina. It's not something special or unique to them.
That is the only ones that I've seen in the correct order. Was the Thor ones. Oh dear God. That one was Malekith, dear God, what were they thinking? I feel ashamed for Chris Eccleston. He's a really good actor. He's one of my favourite Doctors, for crying out loud. And what they had him, they stripped him of everything. He was actually more menacing in the comics. Too hell-bent on getting their money back, I think. That's why they've pissed off people like me. Maybe one of the reasons never managed to get into DC. Obviously, Bruce Wayne, capitalist. He can piss off. Superman, basically a living god. Do kind of like Wonder Woman. Completely jerked her around and all. Yeah. I've not got my wireless headphones on. They're charging, so I've got my wired JBLs instead, and I accidentally hit end stream because I'm a moron. But I'm good now. I've got it moved out of the way, so hopefully that won't happen again. Oops. How many people here have actually seen? Yeah. I forgot that I got a better version of my webcam up here. It's the same brand, it's just a later edition. The other one that I was using, which is back in its box now, it's sitting in the bag, sitting next to me. My God, someone could actually use that. Could I send it to Kath? She could maybe use it. So this one that I'm using now is a 40 quid one that I got half price. So I only paid 20 for it. Because the guy that I bought the first one from, he'd bought too many of the next gen one, and people weren't spending the £55 for it. So he said, right, you bought the first one, I'll give you this one for 20. I've got far too many of them left, so just give me the 20 for it. So I bought this one for 20 quid. It's basically a 50 quid camera. So I got it for basically a third of the price. I like that very much. And it looks a lot clearer now. The ring light's that's attached on it, still kind of harsh. Do I look a bit washed out? Do you think I need to reduce the ring light on it? Let's see how that actually looks. That's better. Back to red.
MacGuffin, but the bad guy better hope that this isn't actually an insta-kill MacGuffin, the kind of MacGuffin that kills you instantly. This MacGuffin, functionally speaking, has no other use. It's just there to kill whoever messes with it. This also serves a plot-specific role because it kills whoever wins the race to the MacGuffin, usually a bad guy, granting the heroes a humble victory and turning the whole thing into a bit of a Shaggy Dog story where the point is that the ending is unsatisfying. This is a pretty common moral for MacGuffin stories, actually. Since a MacGuffin is by nature meaningless, it's very easy to turn the whole thing into a morality tale about the futility and dangers of greed or whatever. The insta-kill MacGuffin is the logical conclusion of this narrative trope, guaranteeing that whoever finally gets their hand on the MacGuffin will have just enough time to regret their life choices before biting it. On a similar note, but a little less murdery, is the worthless MacGuffin, a MacGuffin that turns out to have been worthless. See, all MacGuffins have some kind of informed value getting the characters to pursue them. Fabulous wealth, ultimate power, whatever. But since, by their nature, MacGuffins can never really be used in the story without losing their MacGuffinness, their value is basically theoretical. We don't actually know if the big honkin' diamond is real, only that all the characters think it is. And sometimes, it turns out they were wrong. The worthless MacGuffin is another Shaggy Dog twist that invalidates the whole story. The glowing briefcase was empty, the data drive was switched for a blank one, the sparkly bird statue was actually a shockingly convincing papier-mâché replica, whatever. This trope plays on the inherent meaninglessness of the MacGuffin by informing the characters of what the audience already knew, that the MacGuffin chase is pointless because the object is completely interchangeable and all that matters is that it's wanted. Clever heroes will often use sleight of hand to hand off a fake MacGuffin copy to the other characters who will pursue it just as ferociously as they chase the real thing because all that matters is that they want it. This variant also covers the The real MacGuffin was the friends we made along the way, where the characters are pursuing some neat thing and then it turns out that the thing isn't there, but the journey was really worth it. This is very popular in treasure hunting stories. By far the biggest twist in National Treasure is that they actually found the treasure at the end. But sometimes the MacGuffin's a real thing. For instance, many spy stories focus on tactical MacGuffins, where the MacGuffin in question has some kind of implicit tactical use. Most commonly, it's a component for, or the plans to, some kind of terrible weapon. Obviously, this thing has a theoretical use, namely making a scary weapon happen, but it only sometimes gets that far. This is the kind of thing that can start out as a MacGuffin but becomes something more over the course of the story. Like if the weapon actually gets completed at the start of Act 3 and now the heroes have to stop it from going off. Also, sometimes the tactical MacGuffin is something like an antidote or a vaccine to some kind of bioweapon, and the heroes just need to get it from point A to point B so the cool off-screen lab people can use it to fix the plot. These MacGuffins are essentially keys that unlock new parts of the plot. If the bad guys snag the weapon plans, they get used to unlock the part where the bad guys have the scary weapon. If the good guys bring the antidote home, it unlocks the nobody dying horribly ending. These ones toe the line of MacGuffinhood due to their implicit function in the narrative, but they are still very interchangeable and will almost never see any use outside being delivered to whatever base they're supposed to go to. And finally, we have the walking MacGuffin. See, not all MacGuffins are objects. Sometimes they're people. People lacking an agency who mostly get treated like objects. The archetypical fairy tale damsel locked in the tower fits this category, but this is also where you get your standard escort missions escorting thoroughly useless character A through hostile environment B. A lot of the time, this character is a baby or a child, otherwise incapable of taking care of themselves, that the hero has to watch out for. This also applies to characters who secretly contain MacGuffins, were magically transformed from MacGuffins, or are in some way permanently bonded to a MacGuffin. These character archetypes don't actually—
Please ignore Red. Shouldn't be Red. I will die on this hill. He was one of my favourite characters in the comic books. Fucking loved Vision. And they ruined him. Ruined him.
have to be MacGuffins themselves, but if they're KO'd, abducted, or otherwise stripped of their agency, then they basically end up as MacGuffins anyway. However, just because a character started their life as a magic crystal statuette given life by arcane sorceries to disguise their precious nature from the world, doesn't mean this character has to just sit around and take whatever the world deals them. In order for a character to be a MacGuffin, they really need to be impressively useless. However, there's a lot of drama to be had with a character who has agency but is being treated like a MacGuffin because they're connected to a MacGuffin. Something to play with, maybe. Now, I mentioned that MacGuffins don't actually need to stay MacGuffins for the whole story. It doesn't happen very often, but sometimes MacGuffins transcend their MacGuffin nature and become genuinely relevant to the plot. This is very common in any story where the MacGuffin is an egg, and yep, that happens weirdly frequently. The MacGuffin egg will basically be agencyless and interchangeable right up until it hatches and becomes something. Whatever it is, it has more personality than a rock, which is a major step up. It's also pretty common in a story where the MacGuffins form a chain of plot coupons that the characters need to assemble into something bigger. Usually when the MacGuffins are all mashed together, something much more useful comes out, like a giant robot.
I love the Eternal Dragon Shenron. It's awesome. Oh my god, the Dead Zone. Pretty sure it's been about a week since I've last watched it.
Or a wish-granting dragon, or the unstoppable Exodia, this thing is much less likely to be a MacGuffin, even if it's probably still a plot device. Also, sometimes a MacGuffin will turn out to be a choosy magical artifact that only works in the hands of one special person, and it's completely inert and useless in the hands of anyone else. This'll bounce around as a MacGuffin for a while until the chosen one finds it, and suddenly it's a magical weapon with a lot more impact on the plot. Now, I do want to say, MacGuffins get thrown around as kind of a bad thing, but while they're kind of non-entities, there's nothing actually inherently wrong with them. I mean, there are tons of great stories where the pivotal focus of the narrative is a functionally interchangeable thing that everybody just wants, and that is a great recipe for character drama and action. I mean, it's like the simplest plot in existence. People want thing. But simple isn't bad. It's a stable scaffolding that gives you room to play. And honestly, it's kind of nuts that we can write entire stories that just center on an axis of nothing. You can write incredibly wacky character drama where the motive of every single character is empty. Blank. Insert thing here. For instance, loads of adventure narratives are centered on chasing down MacGuffins. Peak example, the entire Uncharted franchise is basically Nathan Drake chasing after one MacGuffin after another. In the first game, it's the Golden Sarcophagus El Dorado, which turns out to be an insta-kill MacGuffin containing a deadly virus. In the second game, it's the Chintamani Stone, which turns out to be an evil power-up MacGuffin. Then in the third game, it's a brass vessel full of evil genies that poison the water supply. I think I had to check the wiki. But it gets chucked back into the water before it can be used for anything. And then in the fourth game, it's the treasure of infamous pirate Henry Avery, which is miraculously completely uncursed and harmless, but it manages to drive a complex character-driven narrative about the dangers of greed, as this completely mundane treasure drove an entire pirate colony to destruction and threatens the protagonist with the same, and only Nathan Drake is level-headed enough to not let himself be consumed by the same greed. The bad guy is even physically crushed by the gold. It's still a MacGuffin, but it's one that drives some very intense character arcs. Now, MacGuffin-centric storylines do normally fall into one of these categories. The generic baseline everyone wants the thing ones, the we can't let the bad guys get this so we gotta play keep away ones, the we gotta get the MacGuffin from point A to point B but unfortunately 500,000 dudes just jumped out of the underbrush with designs on our subplots one, and the gotta catch 'em all ones where they're racing to collect all the MacGuffins before anyone else does. These are very simple by necessity, but again, they serve as good frameworks for character-driven plots. When the story is simple, the characters have a little more freedom to be complex. In short, MacGuffins are goofy and often kinda maligned, but honestly I think they're totally inoffensive story-wise. Baby Yoda's a MacGuffin and you guys all love him. Have a heart. So, yeah. This video was brought to you by World Anvil, but like... Hey guys! So in case you haven't noticed, it takes me forever to actually make a video. The real time sink is the drawing.
Ooh. Ugh. Where have I got these girls? Do-do-do, do-do-do. Where are you, you horrible, horrible bastards? Do-do-do-do. Hmm. Hmm. Okay. Hmm. Oh, right. Horrible bastards. Du-du-du-du. Oh, didn't mean to do that. Oh. Oh. Okay, that was kind of freaky. Da-da-da-da. Okay. Shadow cabinet. I have no idea. Ugh. Tory. Tory shadow cabinet. Ugh. Oops.
Some breaking news now, because the new Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, has announced her new shadow cabinet. Mari's here. So, who are the runners and riders?
Okay, so lots and lots that have been announced so far. Let me take you through them. So the ones we already knew, Mel Stride, Shadow Chancellor. So he'll be facing off Rachel Reeves at the dispatch box. Next up, Chris Philp. He's now the Shadow Home Secretary. Chris Philp used to be a policing minister under Rishi Sunak. So that is really interesting that he's now gone up in the ranks in his party, albeit in opposition. Priti Patel, as we were saying earlier, confirmed to be the Shadow Foreign Secretary. A massive comeback for her after a bit of a tricky time, perhaps on the back benches.
I have no idea who this James Cartledge is. No idea. So plucked from obscurity in the Tory backbenches, essentially. Obviously, we all know who this witch is. She should never have been invited back into the shadow cabinet at all. She shouldn't. Really don't want her in the entire fucking place, really. She's obviously a Brexiteer. I thought Mel Stride was one of the One Nationers. I thought he was a Remainer. Now he's working with this. Oh, it's a good question, actually. What is he? What was he before he was an MP? Do. Okay. Straight. Okay, Melvin Oh. Claps, I'll get you in a minute. Melvin Stride. Oh my god. Yeah, Shadow Chancellor. Yeah. Central Devon. Oh. Do. Yeah. Early life and career. Portsmouth Grammar School. Oh, for fuck's sake. PPE. St Edmunds Hall in Oxford. Right. He was the president of the Oxford Union. Might have fucking guessed it. In 1987, Stride set up a business specialising in trade exhibitions, conferences and publishing. Venture Marketing Group, which he and his wife jointly controlled before selling it to an American subsidiary. For Christ's sake. Bloody hell, his wife's only 4 years older than me. Hang on. That means he's 14 years older than her. Interesting. Yes, I remember him being working pensions. Okay.
And then also Shadow Defence Secretary James Cartledge. Now, defence is often an area in which the Tories normally feel relatively confident. So that's
Don't know
interesting that they
why.
chose James Cartledge. Let me talk you through a few of the others as well. So Shadow Health Secretary Ed Agar, Shadow Education, as we've heard yesterday, Laura Trott, Shadow Business, Andrew Griffith. Now that's interesting because there was a lot of talk about whether he might be Shadow Chancellor. Oh, there we go. We've got more on our screen there. And look, you've got the leadership rival Robert Jenrick confirmed to be Shadow Justice Secretary as well. Also, Helen Whately, she's Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary. And interesting, look at that. Victoria Atkins is the Shadow...
Environment.
What does that say on the screen?
Food and Rural Affairs.
There we go, yes, DEFRA. Now, that's interesting because Victoria Atkins did not support Kemi Badenoch in the leadership race. She supported Robert Jenrick quite vocally. She was often the kind of One Nation poster girl that was considered to be a justification for why Robert Jenrick could unite different factions of the party, even though he was considered a bit of a right-winger. So that's interesting that she's gone a bit of a demotion for her, but nonetheless, she's still in the shadow cabinet, so you can't really complain. Interestingly, look at this. Claire Coutinho, she stays as Shadow Energy Secretary. She was Energy Secretary under Rishi Sunak. You have this little group of people, Laura Trott, Claire Coutinho, they were both around Rishi Sunak, big supporters of Rishi Sunak. Also Alan Mack, Andrew Bowie, big supporters of Kemi Badenoch. They've both got shadow cabinet roles. Alan Mack is the Shadow Science and Tech Secretary. Andrew Bowie, who we had on the programme just yesterday, wasn't
Here we go. Andrew Bowie. Shadow Scotland. We are not happy. Trust me, we're not happy with Ian Murray either, because that man is a bastard. We've never had a decent Scottish secretary. We haven't. Christ, even we had Gordon Brown as Prime Minister, for fuck's sake, we weren't happy with him either. Because we're all door-faced bastards apparently up here. No, you're not picking the best of us. You do realise this. Mind you, whoever joins Labour up here cannot be trusted, obviously, because they're a unionist party. But picking that little weasel as Shadow Scotland, he's only going to get voted in up there. Thank you, Dargesh. Yes, we do. We really do. I'm more worried about what Ian Murray's going to be doing personally, because Christ knows he's going to be gunning for most of the 9 that we've got left up here. My MP is Labour now. Again, I warned everyone. I've forewarned them. I'm more than likely going to get proven right because they always treat us like shit. This part of Glasgow that I live in, we voted Labour from the fucking Stone Age until we kicked them out. Then things started changing when we voted in the SNP down in Westminster and up here in Scotland. Then because of all the scandals and stuff that were happening surrounding Sturgeon and Peter Murrell and stuff like that. And Hamza, dear God. Go away. I'm not looking forward to the next 4 years essentially, or next 5. It's not going to be fun. I'm still scared about what she's going to do in the Department of Work and Pensions between Reeves and fucking Kendall. I'm glad my benefits moved up here now, but my husband, my super hubby, his benefits still come from Westminster essentially. The vast bulk of them come from Westminster. They're controlled by the Department of Work and Pensions. I'm completely separate now, thank fuck. And I'm getting decent money now. So we can actually get a slightly better, decent living up here in this hell-ridden flat of ours. But I feel for people like myself who live down in England and Wales, they're going to get fucking ruined.
He is now Shadow Scottish Secretary. Then for the other devolved nations, we have Alex Burghardt for Shadow Northern Ireland Secretary, and also Mims Davies for Shadow Welsh Secretary as well. There's a few others: Shadow Culture, Stuart Andrew, Gareth Bacon for Shadow Transport as well. So that whole thing has been announced. And I think also later on today, we're expecting more announcements. So the full Shadow Cabinet list has been released. However, this is interesting. No job for Tom Tugendhat. Now, we were talking, weren't we, about
also
Tom
a runner
Tugendhat.
for leading the
Exactly,
party.
he was one. So we have Mel Stride, we have Robert Jenrick, we have...
Him and Cleverly refused. He didn't want to work with her. He didn't want... Cleverly, I think he might have been persuaded if Jenrick had won. But both of them flat out said they were never going to join her shadow cabinet if she won. They said flat out during the leadership campaign that they would never join her shadow cabinet. Good for them, I guess. Telling her to piss off. Still Tories, of course. So at least they stuck to their guns and told her where to fucking go.
Pretty Patel, all those three said are in the shadow cabinet. James Cleverly said he wouldn't stand, and then obviously you had Kemi, and then the sixth person was Tom Tugendhat. He is not there. James Cleverly said he wouldn't stand, and then obviously you had Kemi, and then the sixth person was Tom Tugendhat. He is not there. Very interesting that either he wasn't asked or he didn't accept what he was offered. So we'll try and find that out. And also, it says later in the week, Kemi Badenoch will appoint the remainder of the team on a rolling basis. So that's the big announcement. Those are the headline names. And then slowly but surely, we'll get a bit of a trickle out of the more junior shadow ministers throughout the week as well.
And we heard from Nigel Huddleston, the Conservative co-chairman. acknowledging that some people will have to double up on their briefs because there's 124 people in the government ministerial positions, etc., and there's 121 Conservatives. And some people are going to have to do a fair bit of work, you know, and some have ruled themselves out, like Jeremy Hunt, for example.
Exactly. Jeremy Hunt, Oliver Dowden, James Cleverly, big names, Steve Barclay, all ruling themselves out as well. So, yeah, those are the headline names. Interesting, no job for Tom Tugendhat. Interesting that Victoria Atkins is still in the shadow cabinet despite backing Robert Jenrick.
We'll see how it all shakes down. Mari, thank you so much.
I'm watching that one. How long is it? It's only 9 minutes, fuck it.
Edwina, Kemi Badenoch, is she the new Mrs T?
Up to a point, I think she is, and it's really quite exciting. The comparisons are almost uncanny. You've got both women were in their 40s. Margaret was a scientist, which was in itself very unusual in Parliament at the time. Yes. Kemi is a computer engineer. My goodness, she could probably take the whole of this place apart and put it back together again. That in itself is really unusual in Parliament because mostly they are PPE graduates or something like that. And Kemi has a crisp, thoughtful, intelligent way of speaking. She's really been thinking about...
Shut up. She's a frightful, frightful woman. Frightful person. I really shouldn't be surprised that the Tory grassroots members voted for her. They're so divorced from normal people's lives now because they're all in their mid to late 60s. They're all in their pensions. Most of them have got decent houses that they can maybe downsize and go on cruises or whatever they want to do. Most of them, at least. No, she is going to be obsessed with culture war issues, which is not what we want. The country is screaming out for funding. She needs to be challengingly, well, obviously she'll probably agree with what a lot of Reeves wants to do, no doubt. We'll see, obviously. But she's obsessed with culture war issues. Can't be arsed with that. We don't need another Thatcher.
Ideas and philosophy. I've been to the hustings. I listened very hard. I was, finding it quite hard at one stage to choose. And then I thought, no, I think Kemi's really got it. I think she's quite inspiring. That in itself is wonderful.
Lord Edvasey, are you inspired?
Inspiring?
Well, I've known Kemi Badenoch a long time. She was my intern. I'm now old enough to have leaders
of
Conservative parties who were my interns. Intern's a strong word. She spent a week with me when I was an MP, when she was looking at becoming an MP herself. I spoke for her when she took on the unwinnable seat of Dulwich with the great Tessa Jowell, was then the MP. And I like her very much, but I don't like these comparisons with Margaret Thatcher because I think they're unhelpful to her. They're unhelpful to the Conservative Party. Liz Truss was compared to Margaret Thatcher. Didn't do her much good. You remember she famously, I think, sat in a tank mimicking the famous Margaret Thatcher tank
Liz Truss
photo.
compared herself to Margaret Thatcher.
Exactly. So, and it was 34 years ago. I think actually this month, 34 years ago, that Margaret Thatcher was stopped being Prime Minister and leader of the Conservative Party. So I think the Conservative Party has to move on and be a party of the 21st century, a party of technology. As Edwina says, Kemi has a technology background. So I think Kemi is the new Kemi.
Edwina was won over during the campaign.
Yes.
She said she started kind of unsure and ended up backing Kemi Badenoch.
Yeah.
Were you won over during the campaign?
I decided not to vote in this election. I do now somewhat regret it, and I think if I had voted, I probably would have ended up backing Kemi Badenoch. I wanted...
Although that's kind of the safe thing to say today.
Yeah, it is a safe thing.
Yeah.
Last Friday, that would have been a bit more...
That is a very good point, Ed. That's a terrible thing for me to say. How pathetic.
I would have voted for the winner.
I wanted James Cleverly to win. I think James Cleverly is a good guy and the kind of sort of straight down the middle kind of leader I think the Conservative Party needs, because I think the Conservative Party has a great opportunity. I think that I worry, the biggest thing I think the challenge for the Conservative Party...
He was too sensible. Still Tory, obviously. Still Tory. but they were never going to pick him. I could have seen them going with Tugendhat hat after fashion, I guess. It was always going to come down to it. I said to people, I put a bet on them winning, on those two being the last two, and I was right. I won 40 quid from that one. I took 30 of that winnings, gave a tenner to my husband, put the other 30 down, saying she's going to become the leader. Walked away with 100 after that one, with that 30. At least I earned something from it. I treated myself. We got a Chinese for me, and a new underwear set. I needed it. So, at least I won money from it. Got to end up paying for it, of course, obviously, with that woman being the shadow leader, leader of the opposition.
Is not necessarily what Kemi does, it's what the Tory party does. It has to be united.
You didn't vote. Shame on you.
I know.
Shame
Well
on
said,
you.
Edwina.
My
Well
Lord,
said.
goodness. Now,
I've come on here to be punished.
Let's just take this opportunity to remind everybody, Ed here knows more about standing in leadership contests than either of us, and the Labour Party hasn't managed to have even one woman yet, let alone a woman of colour or somebody as
There was a woman
spectacular.
candidate when I stood in 2010.
You beat her.
Diane Abbott.
You beat her.
Well, she came
and
last.
you still didn't get elected. So, I mean, talk about this century.
Thanks, Edwina, for reminding me.
Yeah.
The only one
Sounds
who
like
has
Ed's getting
escaped,
punished.
the only one who has escaped Edwina's wrath, Susanna, is you.
Yeah, but it's only a matter
We've
of
both
time.
been put in our place.
You didn't vote, you didn't stand.
No, I didn't. I haven't stood for leadership of anything. Edwina, you knew, of course, Margaret Thatcher.
Oh, yes. You were quite right. I served under her. Everybody served under Margaret
Under
Thatcher.
her thumb.
But she was a real radical, and she was great at taking rapid decisions. And I think Kemi is going to be similar in due course. If you came to her with a good proposition, like we did on breast cancer screening, for example, it's that long ago, and you had the figures, and you got the numbers, and you knew what you were trying to do and what the benefit was going to be, you presented it to her, you had half an hour of her time. You came out absolutely exhausted, but you had yes from her. Right. That's leadership, and that, I think, is what we really need in this country now.
It's interesting, some of the criticism of Kemi Badenoch is that she's, is she a bit confrontational? Does she make enemies? Is she a bit shrill? Many of the same things were said of Margaret Thatcher when she first became the Conservative leader in the mid-70s. There was quite a lot of kind of idea that she wasn't the right person. She proved them all wrong. Is that just like a natural sexism going on here?
There's a kind of sexism about it, which we look at. You're nodding, which is, we women should be nice and kind and behave ourselves and make the tea and look up to all you men. Ain't going to happen. You said that I was a little confrontational at times,
well, I hope
a little
so.
difficult.
That was why you're a good minister.
As a compliment.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
It's interesting. In her early days, Margaret Thatcher was described as having a shrill and patronising voice. Television critic Clive James compared it to a cat sliding down a blackboard. And she, as a result, she was told her tone was tense and harsh, not deemed to be a natural communicator. She took elocution lessons, of course, famously, and appeared to have a lack of warmth. Nothing has changed, has it, in the treatment of...
By the way, that was the point I was making. I wasn't endorsing these remarks about Kemi. I was just saying that is what her critics say.
Well, that's because she had a high voice. She was a woman, right? So, deal with it, live with it.
She lowered her tone, didn't she?
I love Kemi Badenoch's voice. I think that she has a really clipped, kind of almost scientific way of speaking. You have to listen quite carefully, and I think one of the things she's going to have to do, and like Margaret, she'll probably have 4 years in opposition to learn how to do it. One of the things she's going to have to do is take complex ideas and boil them down to simple language that...
What, you think she's going to last that long, Edwina? Really? More from you. Who can we expect next? Fuck. I'm more worried about what happens if Keith fucks up and we end up getting streeting. Ugh. That man is a ghoul. Yeah, a lot of people actually forget that. Thatcher had elocution lessons. too shrill, too high. If you've not noticed, we do kind of speak a lot high. Scottish women, we kind of speak a lot in a higher register. A fair few of us at least do anyway. Some women don't, obviously. There is differences in our vocal cords and things like that, and how we breathe and how we enunciate. But she was seen as shrill. I don't really look at how she actually sounded, what her voice sounded like. I was more worried about what she was saying and things like that. My stepdad, kinda, said to me, I was born in the March, then 3 months later in the May, she became Prime Minister, so it's my fault. It was my appearance dragged into form, essentially, that made her become Prime Minister. Shut up. Ugh.
Appeals to everybody. So
Margaret Thatcher also spent a lot of time strongly distancing herself from the past, and in particular, Ted Heath, who had been the Prime Minister. They lost the election in 1974. She did not stand for any return to Ted Heath's style of politics as well as his policies. Do you think Kemi Badenoch needs to do the same thing? Does she need to distance herself from Rishi Sunak, Boris Johnson? Now she's won. Is that the right strategy?
I would say not so much from Rishi, who I think time will show, and I'm sure Ed would agree, that he did his very best in extremely difficult circumstances. But yes, we have a lot of past, the Tories, to distance ourselves from, some of which we would much rather have not happen.
So saying Partygate was over.
Radical thought here. Maybe you shouldn't have done that shit then. That might have helped. Absolutely ruined Scotland to lot he is.
The blown at the weekend was probably...
Yeah, well, but it's done. I mean, one of the things why I don't quite agree with Ed is what's done and dusted, you put behind you.
Exactly.
The key thing now is to look to the future. We have a government which in a matter of weeks has trashed the economy and is actually behind in the polls. How did that happen? It probably wouldn't have happened if you'd been Chancellor, Ed.
You were agreeing with me, Edwina, because I did say...
Really? You actually think that? Christ, you're more clueless than ever.
We need to look to the future. And every new leader faces the problem of what they do with their predecessor. And every Labour leader has faced the problem of what to do with Tony Blair, who was the most successful Labour Prime Minister in history, but kind of left under a shadow because of the Iraq War. And again, I do think this kind of obsession with looking backwards is very unhelpful. Kemi will be... It's interesting, I agree with...
Keir Starmer spent his whole time dissing Jeremy Corbyn. Tony Blair spent his whole time dissing old Labour.
Yes.
David Cameron spent his whole time saying, I'm changing from the old Conservatives of the past.
Well, I think that's a very...
leaders
I think that's a very
define
good point.
themselves against their past.
I don't think Rishi Sunak deserves opprobrium. He came in a very difficult circumstances. He may not have been as great a Prime Minister as I expected him to be.
Can Kemi Badenoch win the next general election for the Conservatives?
Yes, she can.
Do you believe that?
Yes, I do. I do think, there is that old adage, governments lose elections, oppositions don't win them. But I do think that the new Labour government has presented a very easy target, or a very clear target. The battle lines are drawn. Whatever you think of Rachel Reeves' budget,
tax.
you know where she stands on tax and spend, and that is very different from what a Tory
and not
budget...
old people.
Very different from what a Tory budget would have been. But the key is oppositions may not win elections, but divided oppositions certainly don't win elections. And the key is for the Tory party to unite behind...
Right, let's leave on that message of unity then. Thank you very much indeed, Edwina Curry and Lord Ed Vaizey.
It's still got the name, and it's still got the legal structure. The danger is that after the 4th or 5th of July, you're going to get a far-right movement led by, let's take as an example, Braverman, seizing control of the Conservative Party, which has no real connection with conservatism as we've known it for the last 200 years. It will be the equivalent of Marine Le Pen's party or someone. And it'll delude the voters. So for people who, most people very sensibly take little. We're learning more and more every day about the Reform Party and the bigotry and racism. It's horrible. And yet, have you heard a squeak from Sunak? A proper British Prime Minister would have denounced Farage by now and said, this is unacceptable. Our country will never wear this. This is un-British. And Starmer's been pathetic. It has to be fought. This is the battle of our lifetime. Look what's happening in France. Look what's happening in Germany. It's not going to happen in my Britain. And he'd single out Farage, the unacceptable face of British politics. You've had nothing from either Starmer or Sunak in this general election.
Britain's Conservative Party is the most successful political organisation in the Western world, ever. For the best part of 2 centuries, it has been the default party of government in the UK. It's the equivalent in British politics of Real Madrid. It is, historically speaking anyway, addicted to winning. But that might be about to change. There's a general election here in the UK in July, and if the polling is to be believed, then the Conservatives are in line for a historic hiding. Some polls put them below 20%. Some polls even put Reform, led by Nigel Farage, ahead of them. So on the ballot in July isn't just a candidate or a set of policies or a manifesto or even a potential prime minister, but a whole ideology, a whole tradition and history, a whole way of doing politics. In short, British conservatism is at a crossroad. And some people think that means that this election is the most important, perhaps for a century. After all, it's not very often that one of the major parties collapses. We've seen it once before with the Liberals a century ago. Could we see it happen once more in July? Well, today's guest thinks that's a distinct possibility, and he should know. After all, he is a Conservative with real pedigree to match. Peter Oborne is a former political editor at The Spectator and a former chief political commentator at The Telegraph. And he thinks that the Conservative Party isn't just headed for collapse, but it's about to be replaced by something very different. Peter Oborne, welcome to Downstream.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
We've wanted to get you on for a very long time because you've been saying very interesting things about the Conservative Party for a very long time. And for a very long time, you're a bit of a siren voice who may have been interpreted as being wide of the mark because you were saying there are big problems in the Conservative Party, but of course electorally they were flying high. Now they're not. How do they go from this high watermark of 2019, incredible performance, to where they are today, regularly polling below 20%?
It's a longish story, but you have to start before 2009, the election. It was what happened in the summer when, provoked by Dominic Cummings, Boris Johnson effectively split the Tory party between he got rid of the so-called One Nation wing of the Tory party in, I think it was early August, and the traditional Tory party, the Ken Clarke, the Rory Stewart, the Dominic Grieve, the Gawke. And after that, somebody, this beautiful analogy, I forget who'd made it, the Tory party flies on 2 wings, which balance each other. And thereafter, the Tory party was flying on 1 wing, and it was doomed to crash. And it duly has. I mean, I do think it's going to be the worst result the Tory party has ever had. And I think it may well be the end of the Conservative Party. I quite take quite a... If you analyse what has happened. So in 2019, they brought in a load of MPs who you will have noticed there's been a large number of personal catastrophes, people who've behaved in ever been fraudulent or caught up in wretched dealing or ignored public standards and had to leave or been stripped of the whip. And there was been one scandal after another. This is because the usual sort of methods were abandoned. If you look at who Boris Johnson brought in as his party chairman, was just some sort of financial fixer with public PR man who fixed stuff. He didn't know anything about politics. They knew about how to get money. And I don't actually think now that it's retrievable. I think it's very unlikely that the Conservative Party, as it existed from 18, let's say you can see it arriving in, starting to take proper modern form after the first reform, and then as it's carried on until, the early 21st century, I think that's gone.
So we're looking at almost 200 years of history down the drain.
Well, life moves on, doesn't it? I mean, but I think that it was the greatest and most successful political party in the Western world over the last 200 years. People writing this is how you can save it. I'm not sure you can. I think it's, doomed. But partly because you can't see any figures of any calibre joining it now, and they're not left. They were kicked out, and who's going to bring back? What's going to incentivise Rory Stewart to come back into it? Or the next Ken Clarke, or I think that, and you can see what's going to happen to it in the short term. That it's going to, it has already been to a very large extent captured by the far right, and there's going to be.
The hell?
I think it's, doomed. But partly because you can't see any figures of any calibre joining it now, and they're not left. They were kicked out, and who's going to bring back? What's going to incentivise Rory Stewart to come back into it? Or the next Ken Clarke, or I think that, and you can see what's going to happen to it in the short term. That it's going to, it has already been to a very large extent captured by the far right. And there's going to be a battle for it in the next, after the election.
Well, Tim Montgomery blamed a procession of what he called Napoleonic leaders, which is to say there's nothing wrong with the institution. It's just so happens that several bad leaders have been at the top. And if that hadn't happened, this could have been avoided. But from the sounds of it, you're saying something quite
That's a very shallow analysis, because what produces these bad leaders? And you have to look at the structures which produce those leaders. And it's a story which is connected with movements in society, which is the collapse of civil society, the public realm. And the Tory party is a manifestation of that in certain ways. You can see it being captured by big finance money. It used to have enormous it stretched beautifully out into across the country as a whole to the institution, Women's Institute, these small key C conservative organisations. It reflected the writing, the analysis of of Oakeshott, the great conservative philosopher. There are very few conservative philosophers or political thinkers of great moment, and that was really it's Burke and Oakeshott. And Oakeshott's great insight was that politics didn't matter very much, or shouldn't matter very much, that most people wanted to get on with the ordinary business of their lives, whether it's running a school or owning training a racehorse, which he was fond of, or playing a role in your local community, pursuing your own objectives. But you need, in order for all that to go on, you need to have a party which...
Hi, Scrippy. Welcome in. I like to educate people about Peter Orborn. We should be listening to him. Obviously, still a Tory. But his analysis in this is really good. And obviously, he absolutely despises Farage, so somewhat good to me. Good for him. This is one of the most popular downstreams, I believe, now, which is good. Having people like Peter Orborn on downstream is always a good thing. Obviously, there's plenty of other voices we need to hear from, which is good. I know you're not a bot. We've actually had discussions. Whoops.
keeps out of ordinary life. And it has been captured by a collection of people who want to use politics to make to make money, and that's what Johnson was the most egregious example of this. So he encouraged a culture where very rich men wanted access to the Conservative Party in order to sell their product or get secure soft regulation for their businesses and to get contracts, secure social position. I mean, whatever it was, and suddenly it lost this connection, this deep, profound, centuries-old connection with society as a whole.
Is that, I'm not suggesting you're saying it's new, but how new is it when you look at somebody like, I believe it was Lord Feldman, was alongside David Cameron, and he was very much, he was his partner in crime, and I think he becomes the chair of the party in 2005-06.
Lord Feldman, I don't want to say anything.
And he brings huge amounts of money into the party.
Yeah. Now, look, this is true that, and by the way, I don't want to suggest that Lord Feldman did anything remotely improper. But he does, there was a trend towards this, the financialisation of British politics, going back not all that far, but it went back. It begins in the...
Far too Americanised. No. Get everyone here in the country on an even keel. Kind of higher even keel up here. Not down in the doldrums. Fuck that noise. We need funding in this country. We need better wages, obviously. Obviously, we're not manufacturing for the world anymore. China does most of that. And the third world nations do a lot of the manufacturing as well. Outsourced, of course. Because we demand too much pay. Yeah, God forbid that we should want a decent wage, obviously. So all that gets farmed out. We should be building up our own manufacturing again, and leading new technologies, especially green energy, better public infrastructure, better roads. Yeah, A lot of them do, unfortunately. I like Aristotle. Obviously still a sexist pig. Obviously, look at the culture back then. I'm more of a fan of Diogenes, obviously. Bit of a filthy human being, really. But his thought and his intellect actually created the man that he is. Man was brilliant. Aristotle, Plato, Socrates. Obviously, a lot of these Tories, they do actually venerate, especially Johnson. For Christ, he's fucking obsessed with them. I love them. It gives you a good grounding from where to lead off from, essentially. But for fuck's sake, you didn't need to idolise these bloody Greek idiots. Well, not idiots. These. How do I describe them? Fuck. Sorry, Professor Edie, I'm failing you. Socrates has his place, so does Aristotle, so does Socrates. I like Aeschylus as well. And theatre plays from Aeschylus were just hilarious. Good social commentary, obviously. There's a place for them, obviously, it gives you a good grounding, but the way some of these people obsess about them, especially Rory Stewart, Scottish, by the way, another one of them, him and Idea, oh, fucking hell, Gove. Oh.
Thatcher era. Tony Blair did a lot because in order to eliminate the trade unions
Exactly,
as a
Dargesh.
source of political power and influence, he set up his private fund, you may remember. Quite disgusting in my view, just immorally disgusting, because politics is really about serving the common good. It's not enabling the interests of a small collection of people who can buy it. And Blair did that, and it was hailed as a brilliant innovation, actually. It was a disaster for British politics. Cameron then tried to copy Blair, so he'd seen somebody called Lord Levy do this for Blair, and he brought in figures such as Feldman, and all I'm not blaming people like Feldman, but they don't bring any rich understanding of political traditions or the importance of association and so forth. They see their job as to bring in money, which they do well, but you have to look at the motives. And huge sums of people who invest huge sums of money into the British politics are looking for a return. They're not doing it from out of the goodness of their heart.
And was there a moment in the last few years
Exactly,
for you where you
Dargesh.
thought, actually, decimation is coming? Not like Labour get a poor result in 2019, they get 32%. But we're looking at something, it's not implausible the Tories get half that. That's not going to happen. But it's not implausible the Tories get half that on July the 4th. They could get 20% around margin of error up or down. Did you ever think that was...
Yeah, you and Helena bounce well off each other, by the way, Scribby. You're amazing. Some of the things that you've said in Helena's chat are just brilliant to me. Round of applause for you. I don't do the philosophy as much now. I try to educate people to be more politically aware. Better way of doing things. Thank God for that. Don't get me wrong, I still love my philosophy. I still try to read them every now and again. That must be fun. Christ, I don't want to come down to see that. Join in.
Was possible, say, in 2021 or 2022? Or...
I think if you had read what I wrote at the time, I think it was my analysis that it was finished by then. Because the various reasons. One was the economic model of Brexit, which Johnson promoted, couldn't work, that deal. Secondly, he was so corrupt in terms of his dealings in the public sphere. He corrupted the institutions of the...
Do you want to know how we knew that was going to go as well as it did? Because he's a liar. We know he's a liar. He's always lied. He's been fired 4 times. Once by the people and 3 by... Well, the party fired him. Then she took over. Fuck. Michael Howard fired him when he was leader of the Tories. And 2 editors fired him because he was straight up telling lies in print media and publications and online. So he's been fired 4 times for lying. We knew exactly who this man was. And great swathes of this country fell in love with this absolute charlatan of a politician. Ugh.
British state, and it was becoming unworkable. And so this led, first of all, to the defenestration of Johnson after he
deserved
lied
it.
to the House.
Partially deserved it.
I mean, a lot of people lie, but to actually, it was so well documented that it was set out and the Commons voted on it and established that the British Prime Minister had lied. It was obvious what was happening there.
If you can get through dry as fuck reading, check out the Hansards of some of his interactions when he was either in cabinet or as the leader when he was Prime Minister. Just some of the utter bollocks this man has said is just hilarious. Hansards is a bit of a... It does take a bit of digesting, really. But I'm sad like that. I'd like to check the Hansards every now and again to see what these absolute wankers are saying in the chamber. Because they're meant to be doing it for us, not for themselves, not for their own glory or anything. They're meant to be making our lives better. Not that they'd know better if it came up and sucked them off.
And eventually he had, even the Tory party realised that he had to go. And then you got this series of inept prime ministers, 2 inept, terrible prime ministers, one after another. So I think it was all inevitable from about 2021 onwards, if it wasn't already, because as I say, the damage done when Johnson, and I don't think no political writer writes it because nowadays political writers don't describe politics, they are part of factions. And they're client journalists, generally speaking, there to express the point of view and of the people in power. So with Johnson in power, at apparently his heyday, political journalism became a sort of form of decoration. And so you didn't get serious political journalism or analysis in the Conservative papers. And so the fact that the party had split in 2019, and then it had embarked on it was now then led by a leader who was actually smashing up the party quite deliberately, wasn't reported. In fact, Johnson was hailed as some sort of great man. And it is true that the Conservative papers, there was a problem. You couldn't read this anywhere because The Guardian was inept. Its political reporting was incapable, didn't really understand what was happening. All the papers had backed Johnson to be Tory leader, all the right-wing papers, Murdoch, Rothermere, Express, and the Telegraph, they'd all backed him to be leader. They then all backed him in the 2019 election. And they all backed him as he got into trouble. And then they were still backing him the day he was kicked out of Parliament, kicked out as he lost that key vote and forced to leave. So the Tory papers had returned. My colleagues in the political press had transformed themselves from sensible people trying to understand how power worked and what was being done with it as being propagandists for a particular wing of the Conservative Party, which it was already obvious at that point wasn't conservative. There's nothing conservative about Johnson at all. He didn't understand why institutions matter. That's a conservative idea. He didn't understand, or hated even, due process. He was hostile to the civil service, which is the memory of the British state, really, and he didn't like that. And he was very hostile to the rule of law. He exploited the monarchy, quite extraordinary in a conservative, to the light of the Queen. I mean, quite an extraordinary thing to do. And so we had it wasn't a conservative government, it was a revolutionary government, which was trying to smash the British state. It was doing what Lenin might have wanted to do. You know, that's what it was doing. And cheered on by the so-called Tory press. It was a weird period. And by that, once you saw all that happening, it was clear the whole enterprise was doomed. And the party was doomed by then, yeah.
It's interesting, and there are arguable parallels with what's going on in Labour now. I'm not suggesting for one moment that Labour's heading for these kinds of polling numbers in several years, if ever. I'm not suggesting that for a moment. But this idea that actually...
I want to see it, though.
The timeline we're now in was discernible from the summer of 2019 and the early years of the Johnson government, but there simply wasn't the space within the British media landscape to have the conversations about where this might end. I mean, I do see certain parallels potentially with Labour and Starmer because, for the reasons you've said, the people that should be passing political analysis are in fact just representing a particular faction which is favourable and aligned with the leadership. There's a book coming out from a gentleman called Simon Cooper. I've probably mispronounced that because I think it's a Dutch name, Flemish name. And it's about the demise of the good chaps theory of states.
Yes, I'm aware. I was reading a review of it today and it made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. And he wrote an article in the FT Weekend last weekend, and he said that, the British state, and I think basically this aligns with your argument just a moment ago, effectively British conservatism, in the post-war period, in the democratic period, is really built on a public sphere of public duty, common sense, decency, which is really an outgrowth of the Second World War, mass mobilisation of people into the military and so on, a collective memory of trauma. Can the Conservative Party rediscover that good chaps theory of government? Or is that just simply now, you said you don't see the personnel at the top of the party, but in 5, 10, 15 years, could it come back, or is it?
Yeah, I read a review of it and I thought it made it, I agreed with the analysis, some of the analysis in the review. I think that his timelines were wrong. Actually, he makes out that the good chaps theory starts in I think the mid 20th century. It starts way before that. It's developed by, oddly enough, really the good chaps idea, which is that people are honest. That's what it means. You can trust them. It begins really in the mid 19th century under Gladstone's long period as Chancellor, when Palmerston was Prime Minister, and two great civil servants, Northcote Trevelyan, created the modern civil service, which was based on honour and decency.
Over 130 fucking years ago.
Talking about in his book, or he's talking
Nearly
about,
140.
which looks terrific to me. And they brought in this idea that what had happened in the 18th century, as described brilliantly by Namier in the Structure of Politics of the Accession of George III, absolute masterclass in how politics actually works. He showed that everybody who went into politics in the 18th century was basically out to make money. And that was what they looked at. It was very weird any other reason. And you can see this happens across a lot of the world. And then thanks to, I think, the power of evangelical Christianity, huge factor in Gladstone's understanding of the world, but also industrial competition. States which are bent find it very hard to compete. So much money is funneled off. So if you look at the reason why the two countries which went straight, as it were, adopted codes of public honesty in the late 19th century were Britain and Germany, and they were emerging as the two major global powers at that point. And so that is where you get that code, and the Conservative Party internalises it. And the old Whigs, the old aristocracy, which, And their voices like Trollope, the novelist, who were hostile to the new arrangement and wanted everything to be fixed in favour of an elite. They were gradually marginalised, and the Conservative Party, with a few bumps along the way, became the most public voice of that. But also the Labour Party accepted it. And probably there's another wisdom about the Conservative Party. It also understood that it was unhealthy that it should rule all the time. And so you get this underappreciated premier called Baldwin in the 30s, who's 20s, who understands very quickly that you have to bring the organised working class into politics. And he is really the midwife to the rise of the Labour Party. And he dedicates his political career. Modern historians, I think, mock him for being boring, but that's only because they aren't interested in what he actually did. He dedicates his political career to fending off the far right and the far left. He's terrified of Bolshevism. This is just after 1917. And he's terrified of fascism. We got the rise of Hitler and Mussolini. And what he does then is to bring in Labour as a mainstream political party, approved as part of British high establishment. And then, of course, when Labour fails temporarily splits in 31, he sort of rescues it, actually, with MacDonald. And then he sees off, or he doesn't allow, the fascist elements, which are always there under the surface in Britain, to seize the Tory party in the 1930s. He gets a rotten press, partly because Churchill hated him wrongly. I mean, he gets a rotten press, but that is the embodiment of the wisdom of conservatism. And that's what we've totally lost. Because the current generation of conservative leaders do not understand what Baldwin was on about. And so you get idiots like Sunak. I mean, very sinister people, actually, like Sunak, you see it's one of the most frightening things which happened in British politics ever was Sunak's trip, totally unreported as far as I can tell by the client press, to visit Maloney for a political event just before Christmas last year, where they're spouting the Great Replacement theory. I mean, this is very dark stuff. And you saw, obviously, he's still getting on with Maloney. Look at that sort of extraordinary meeting they had just a few days ago. And so you get a Conservative Party which now is now driven by weird strategists, I think, who just think of where do we get the next vote and not.
Scribby, would I like that book, do you think? I'm going to treat myself. I'm going to get myself a game so I could actually play a game on my computer. Maybe cheer people up instead of doing all this dry political analysis with me either disagreeing with certain people and shit like that. Obviously, it's good. Educating the masses and everything. Always agree with that. But actually having a game to play might be good. Cheer people up a bit. Distract them. At least from the shit conditions that we're currently suffering. I could actually do a lot about books and encourage people to read certain types of books. Read this, read these ones, read these people. These are good. This is a good analysis of said situation, whatever. So if you want, you can jump over to my Discord and just put it in the general chat if you like. Numpty Women, by the way. I think you're actually already joined, I believe. If you're not, feel free, go over. And I might actually pick up a couple of books and digest them and let everyone know about them and encourage people to buy them. Or if they want, I can send them to them. So that'd be quite good. I'm tempted to read that book Aaron was talking about as well. See, I'd want to pronounce that Kuiper if it's a Flemish name. Oh, give me a minute. I'll start back again.
What do we stand for?
This is interesting on the point of strategy, because the person who's apparently leading this so-called non-strategy by the looks of it, but alleged strategy, Isaac Levido, is a protege of Linton Crosby.
Yeah.
But there doesn't feel to be any continuity with the professionalism of their campaigns of yesteryear. So I can understand your point of they think in tactics, not strategy, i.e. short-term responsive thinking rather than long-term, 10, 15 years, what are we doing, what are we for? But that doesn't necessarily explain the amateurishness of it, or does it?
Well, I think it is almost impossible to exaggerate the damage Linton Crosby, who was a very suave, intelligent person, has done to Britain via the Conservative Party. Because I think you'll find, if you look into Linton, a very underexplored figure, because here's a rule of British political journalism. Anybody who's genuinely important never gets written about because he or she is too dangerous to inspect. And so I'd love to know more about who was financing Linton's campaigns. He ran Johnson's No Deal strategy. He was behind that hard Brexit we had, and it was just getting rid of Mrs. May. That was very much with the help of the very able strategist of Linton, who, by the way, is a very civilized person. I know him. I mean, whereas Isaac Levido, it's a bit like Isaac Levido to Linton. It's a bit like, should we say, Tom Baldwin to Alistair Campbell, a sort of minor version, a sort of
Mini-me.
Mini-me, yes. And I think that's what you got going on. I think clearly Levido, there's been anxious briefing from people close to Levido, I'm told, that he was against.
Anyone else, feel free, join, post whatever you want there. I will go through it all. I'm looking for mods if any of you want to be mods. Obviously, no pressure or anything, of course. Just feel free, come on over. Post anything you think I would like, or things that you want me to discuss about, okay? The more the merrier.
Against this date for an election. But nevertheless, to bring in these very crude, divisive politics, the so-called culture wars, as a way to try and rescue the situation for the Conservatives, has done enormous damage to Britain. This is the other thing which is upsetting. It is the duty of a statesman, who aspires to high office, to bring the country together. But Conservative Party, under the wedge politics kind of adopted by Linton, which he'd already tried out, as you know, in Australia, with great success, these wedge strategies about creating divisions where none previously existed. And I can see they have been...
I will insert Kemi here. Watch this space. We'll see how she pans out. Was it a given that Cleverly was never going to join her cabinet? Well, I think for him at least, yeah. I'm surprised Jenrick joined. Obviously, Candace gained blind political ambition, obviously, on his behalf. Obviously.
The Linton Crosby strategies have been politically very successful, and he's also known how to avoid losers. But they've been, to us as a nation, they've been in my view, they've been a total calamity.
I've only ever received letters threatening civil action as a result of alleged defamation twice. One was from Majid Nawaz when I mistakenly called him a terrorist. I meant a former terrorist. I meant former extremist. He was correct. I apologised. I paid the expense of the letter. Fine. And I was in the wrong. That's fine. I should have been more thoughtful in my words. Another time, the only other time, was Linton Crosby when I said that he had traded in, I think, Islamophobic tropes in the Canadian election when they were campaigning against Trudeau. And on that occasion, I had used my words very carefully. And what was interesting is, I think about a week or two subsequent to that tweet, I got an email and a letter saying this is defamatory, please delete, make an apology, blah, 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 blah. And I said, I see, there's no problem here. If you want to take this any further, please be my guest. And they never did. But I got the sense that I was dealing with very professional, serious people.
No, I think he is. As I say, I do think he has been the most accomplished political strategist.
Between him and that other garbage Australian, don't get me wrong, some Australians are very based individuals. I love them. They're amazing people. But between Linton Crosby and fucking Murdoch, those two are garbage. Utter garbage. That's what the Americans get wrong. They keep on calling him British. He isn't. He's fucking Australian. We don't want him. Fuck off.
Of our age. I just think he's done a lot of harm while he's been doing it.
But the point you said about people don't write about the individuals that matter. I mean, that really is so true. I think the minute I've even said a tweet about him, which is in no way defamatory, I think can be held up very clearly. Even that got an email and letter. I wonder how often that happens. But anyway, I suppose the counter argument to this is, well, if you look at the polling right now, yes, the Tories are doing very poorly, let's say 19, 20%, depending on which day it is.
Serves them right.
But Reform are doing very well. And if you look at where the Tory votes are going, some are staying at home, some are going Labour. But the largest number of people who are no longer voting Tory, who did in 2019, are going to Reform. Doesn't that fly in the face of your analysis that actually dealing in the culture wars?
Aaron is slightly wrong there. We've now got detailed descriptions of where all the votes went now. Obviously, it would take a while to collate them all, obviously. A lot of them did go to Labour. A lot of them went to the Lib Dems. Fair enough. Only a certain portion of the over 55s. Obviously not my super hubby. He can't vote for any of the unionist parties. He never would. I kept on saying him. He keeps on threatening me that he's going to vote for the Tories or for Reform. He said, I know you'll try because you'll come out with a pencil stuck in your eye. He'll never be able to vote for them, ever, after what happened in the 70s when he was when he was growing up, when he was a wee boy, and what Thatcher done. Can't do it. Won't vote for any of them. Lib Dem, Labour, Tory, Reform. Won't vote for any of these people at all. He's feeling a little bit politically homeless now because the SNP decided to join in with the Greens, and he doesn't think they're a serious party at all. Hopefully he'll get proved wrong. I will try to educate him, don't worry. So, if I come with a photo of a pencil sticking out of someone's eye, I'll blur out the rest of his face, but if you see a pencil stuck in an eye, that'll be my husband after trying to vote for the Tories or Labour. The Lib Dems aren't really a political threat here in Glasgow, I don't think. Not really. Labour are, obviously. And it would be a very, very brave man to vote for the Tories in the north of Glasgow, really. If anyone found out that you voted for the Tories, he wouldn't survive. Not entirely sure I've divorced him or not. Cross that bridge if it ever happens, obviously. I can never vote for them. I voted for Blair. Well, it wasn't Blair I voted for, it was Jackie Baillie in the 97 election when I was living in Clydebank. Fuck. That was a while ago. But that was the first and last time I voted Labour. Ever since, it's only ever been SNP or Green. I switched to Green for Holyrood 2 Holyrood elections ago. So my candidate then was, still is, he's on the list, it's Patrick Harvey. I'd really want us to have an actual Green MSP up here. Not entirely sure it's possible. Give it time. I'm trying. But I'm never trusting Labour again, ever. Not doing it. And for ideological reasons, obviously, I'm never going to vote for the scum. And the Lib Dems as well, just really, really never. Maybe in the West End, maybe Partick, Kelvin Hall, places like that, downhill. I think they flirt with voting Lib Dem. It's mostly Labour here in Glasgow. It's the outer reaches of the greater Glasgow metropolitan area that vote for the Lib Dems. Bishopbriggs, Milngavie, places like that, Newton Mearns, the leafy suburbs, if you will. But the inner city ones like us here, we're never going to vote for Lib Dem. We're never going to vote for the scum either. 312 voted for the Tories here in the election. What? Who the fuck are you people? Why would you vote for these scum?
Isn't advantageous. Somebody like Farage would say, actually, they're not doing it properly. They're not serious enough about ending net zero, about being hard on migration, and actually your read on it is the wrong one. What would you say to that?
I don't think that
Sweet.
Farage is playing culture wars.
Christ, it's been years since I've actually read it in the German.
Serious. I mean, I think that the people who advised Linton, who advised the Conservative Party, was to use them in order to, as an election gambit. I think that I was slow to realise this. I think you can see now that Farage and the Reform Party are a prototype. I think you've got to be very careful to use about the word fascist because it has certain meanings. Above all, the use of political violence in the street and also unhelpful comparisons with the 1930s. But nevertheless, what you have here is Farage is you can.
Peter, my good man, some of them are fascists. Honestly, maybe not in Parliament. Maybe some of them might be, but they're being very. Farage is, though, without a doubt. And all the ones who actually support him, who went to their fucking conference, Christ, that's another fucking. Lots of them are fucking fascists. They are. They're the ones involved in the riots. I have no problem calling people fascists. If they act like fascists and they do the shit that they're doing, they are.
Connect him to a group of European movements. I think that's he's a part of a conservative movement, not a party, including Le Pen and Orban and the AfD and so on. And what they're really doing, fundamentally, is running the Great Replacement theory, which was a book by a French far-right intellectual about 12 years ago, wasn't it? And it means Western culture is under threat, a Western civilization, our life under threat from these sinister immigrants who've come to, challenge our way of life. It preys on fears which people have. And again, the job of a proper politician, a responsible politician, looked like Edward Heath in 1968 when he sacked Enoch Powell. Enoch Powell was a prototype for Farage. Very sinister, openly racist. And the Conservative Party in 1968 dealt with Farage, dealt with Powell. Farage openly admires Powell. And so you've got the return of Powell through another means. With his Reform Party, which is, if you look at the tweets, we're learning more and more every day about the Reform Party and the bigotry and racism. It's horrible. And yet, have you heard a squeak from Sunak? A proper British Prime Minister would have denounced Farage by now and said, this is unacceptable. Our country will never wear this. This is un-British. Farage was even claiming to be British, British values. So this is the opposite of the great multicultural traditions, welcoming of immigrants and decency, which our country stands for and always has stood for. That's what Heath did, in effect, in 1968 when he killed off Enoch Powell's career overnight. And Starmer's been pathetic. I'm really shocked that the incoming Labour leader hasn't made a speech saying this is revolting. It has to be fought. This is the battle of our lifetime. Look what's happening in France. Look what's happening in Germany. It's not going to happen in my Britain. And he'd single out Farage, the unacceptable face of British politics. You've had nothing from either Starmer or Sunak in this general election. Nothing I've seen anyway, have you?
Well, I think Starmer was asked today about Farage, and I think he basically gave no comment. He
exactly,
said,
no comment, right?
I'm focusing on the election and the issues that matter to people.
And have you noticed the coverage in the political papers? And so they're all playing, leaving aside the Guardian, they're playing with him. The Telegraph pretty well backing him, almost deranged political commentary from the Telegraph, pretty well backing him. Spectator on the week that he came back as leader of Reform, had 4 articles about Farage. Not one of them criticised his Islamophobia, his easy tolerance of racists, his bigotry. Not one. Charles Moore, Douglas Murray. I'm talking memories. In this week's Spectator, you've got Toby Young endorsing Farage in The Spectator. Now, The Spectator is, somebody called it the Bible of the Conservative movement. And so they really do. They want this merger, don't they, with the far right. It's like the National Front merging with the Conservative Party. It's horrible. And it's exactly the opposite of what the founding fathers of conservatism were about. You remember Edmund Burke, they all praise Edmund Burke. What was his career founded on? But, he was attacking the bigotry of the British Empire. The Warren Hastings case. He was standing up for the rights of, people who weren't just exploitative Brits. He had a wide, generous moral compass. This narrow, sectarian, bordering on white supremacy.
I'll give Burke his due. I'll give him his due for that one. Still a semi-capitalist kind of person. But yeah, a lot of them did actually speak out about the British Empire and how destructive it was. The ills we've laid waste to the rest of the planet, essentially. Where do you think the Americans learned it from? They got it from us. Sickening. Ugh.
Supremacism sometimes we're now getting from the far right, from the mainstream Conservative Party and Reform is an extraordinary moment.
So there's that big historical sweep, which I love, by the way, talking about, the incentives for people entering politics in 18th century Britain, talking about Burke and Oakeshott. And I can see all of that, and I can see this huge deviation from its historical origins that's now taking place in British conservatism. But to anchor it in 2024, is it possible even for the Conservatives to dismiss Farage like Heath did in 60?
I must admit, I do like what happens to him when he comes up here. We're not going to believe you. Just fuck off. They were threatening me. No, we fucking weren't. You're not worth it. Just piss off. Can't be arsed with people like Farage at all.
With Enoch Powell, because they're polling. It's one poll had them ahead of the Tories. They're looking at winning several seats. Farage has an incredible presence in the media, incredible, far more than Powell ever did. And I just wonder. I appreciate that's the historical analogy, but it feels like we're seeing something an order of magnitude bigger. And so, as a political challenge for Starmer too, doesn't that make it a little bit different? Or am I buying the Kool-Aid with Farage?
I think one of the problems, I again return to the nature of contemporary
That is a very good fucking question. Isn't Aaron Banks anymore, is it? I would actually love to see who's actually funding him. That might be actually quite a good thing to find out. See if he's fallen foul of the campaign financing laws. I wouldn't know where to fucking start. Helena might know. Kev might know as well, actually. Could ask Kev. Who do you think it is, Scrubby? We need to find out. We do. We really do.
Political discourse is that it's about sort of narrow arguments about strategic advantage and how do we get these votes and so on. It's not about looking ahead or actually asking what do we stand for, what are our actual values. And that is, to my mind, much more important. And if you go back to, I've talked about Baldwin, I was talking about Edward Heath, talking about the early creators of the Tory party, like Peel. I mean, they're really people who put their careers on the line for major issues. So I can see that strategically there is this argument now coming from two different places. One is from these strategists, these invisible creatures inside political parties, who are saying, look, if we're going to get more votes at the election, we need to form an alliance with Reform. Yeah? And then you get the ideologists who now want to move the Conservative Party away from being this broad church, which has, broadly speaking, existed for nearly 200 years, to being a movement, a conservative movement, with friendships and common purpose with the far right in Europe.
But I mean,
And to me, it seems you may be right that actually. And my fear is that after the general, so let's move on to in a few weeks' time, right? You've got 100 seats or something, maybe less, and there's a battle, but for who's going to be the next Tory leader. It may take several years because you will see probably Suella Braverman will emerge as the leading candidate for the great replacement theory, as it were. And you'll find that there'll be somebody, maybe Penny Mordaunt's or Hunt Ways of.
Back momentarily.
survive electorally, and there'll be a little battle, and that battle is very important because it's a battle for the title deeds of the Conservative Party. Effectively, the Conservative Party has gone in terms of its deep roots in civil society, up and down Britain, Scotland, the North, manufacturing industry, agriculture. It really doesn't exist in a serious way anymore. But it still exists in our history. This has been the eminent party of government for 200 years.
Fair.
It's still got the name, and it's still got the legal structure. The danger is that after the 4th or 5th of July, you're going to get a far-right movement led by, let's take as an example, Braverman, seizing control of the Conservative Party, which has no real connection with conservatism as we've known it for the last 200 years. It will be the equivalent of Marine Le Pen's party or someone. And it'll delude the voters. So for people most people very sensibly take little interest in politics, they won't know that the party has, they're canvassing under a conservative name is really somebody deeply unpleasant with foul views, which can trend towards fascism in due course. I mean, you remember, fascism doesn't knock on your door saying we're fascists. They say we're nice people who share your concerns.
You said that they've got no anchor in society, this modern conservative movement. And I mean, that's inarguable. I've been going to places like Godalming or Fareham or Wickham or small town or large town, conservative seats, the so-called blue wall across the south. And it's very clear to me that the Conservative Party has collapsed. Even the people who are still planning to vote for them they now hate the Conservative Party because they're not right-wing enough, or because they've just not executed very well in office. People will say, my DNA is effectively conservative. I will vote for the Conservative Party even if they get 0 seats. Those people actually dislike the party more than anyone. In some cases, there's nothing worse than a disappointed romantic. And I think many of them felt quite eager about the Conservative Party, relatively recently, whether that's Thatcher or whether it was Brexit. And
don't be a disappointed romantic then. Change your politics. It's easy done, trust me, I've done it several times in my life. I was a fucking Trotskyist for a while. We all move on, we all grow, we all become better people, I would hope. I hope. Obviously, some people are just stuck in their ways. So tunnel vision, they can't actually see past their own narrow interests. That's why that whole thing with the big society and Cameron and Gideon irritated me so much. All your previous leaders and prime ministers fucking destroyed that big society with neoliberalism. You can praise your Saint Maggie all you fucking like. He's ruined this country, ruined it.
That's obvious to me. And again, the relationship of the Conservative Party to the institutions of British civil society, the National Trust, RNLI, RSPB. I mean, it's astonishing the Tory party goes to war with the National Trust.
It's amazing. Led by the... I've also noticed, it's quite fascinating, if you read the Daily Telegraph, which I do with a growing sense of amazement, it also attacks the middle classes.
Yeah.
There's a category of people called middle-class Remainers, which the Telegraph has really got it in for. I mean, they actually hate their own readers. It's an extraordinary thing. And and they're they're running a campaign against the National Trust. Where are we? Yeah. And that is, I think, and you can see their flirtation, you see, with reform. And that's really serious.
But the part of civil society where they do still have roots is what you just said there, which is the media. So that's the part of conservative, let's say small c conservative British civil society, where there is still that connection with the party, the large C Conservative Party. And you're somebody who's obviously been in that world. You were chief political commentator for The Telegraph. You were political editor for The Spectator. You criticised both outlets a few moments ago. Have they changed?
Yeah,
I'll
explain.
Or have you changed?
I'll explain what has happened. I would argue that I haven't changed very much. more or less I stand for exactly the same thing, which I did when I was a political columnist. We had nothing as vulgar as political editors in those days. They were called political correspondent, because a political editor edits nothing at all. He writes. It's just a sort of inflated, non-meaningless phrase to make people appear grander than they really are. But I'd argue that I was, when I was at The Spectator, my values were exactly the same as now. I believed in the rule of law, trashed by the Conservative Party. I was a strong monarchist, still am, mocked Michael Gove. He even leaks Privy Council conversations with Queen Elizabeth. I mean, and so on. They have been...
Another way we diverge here, definitely not a monarchist. Definitely not a monarchist. Definitely not. I get small c, I do. I don't get the big C. The big C can go and fuck off for all I care. Seriously. Absolute garbage party. Hate them. I can see people being conservative, as in the small c. I get that. Some people are like that. These people exist. We must try to educate them. Don't shun them. Bring them into the light. I try to help wherever I can, but if they're a lost cause, fuck them. Get out of my sight. But the big C, the Tory party, utter scum, they can fuck off. I have no time for them anymore. Never had any time for them at all, really. Growing up deprived, ill, breaking down on a daily basis, physically, maybe psychologically and emotionally. Trying to help with that, obviously. But the big C, the Tory party, fuck off. You've destroyed our country, fuck off. We need shot of them. And Labour have just basically taken over because that Tory party that he's talking about is gone now, it's dead, doesn't exist. And the fact that some of these papers are playing up to this absolute scum of a human being. No, Reform, Farage, Rupert Lowe, you can just piss off and all. And some of the people, the interviews from, as people were going into their conference a few months ago.
Captured. All of these groups, the Conservative Party, but also the newspapers, have been captured by the super rich. It's very horrible. There was a connection between the Times, the Telegraph, only a generation ago, the Daily Mail, with civil society, with its readers. And it did represent them. The paper, if you look at the ownership of the papers now, Murdoch was the precursor of this, who's never been British as far as I know, and how much British taxes does he pay? You know, it doesn't really have, you've got to ask whose interests are at heart. Does he have at heart? And the Telegraph is getting odder and odder under the ownership of the Barclay brothers, actually attacking its own readers. And I tend to see these newspapers having fallen under the control of a small group of very rich men. I can't see any women involved in this process, who have their own reasons for wanting to own newspapers, namely to exercise political control, achieve their ends. And 30 million or 40 million on a media outlet can actually be a very good investment if you can change policy in the direction you want it.
I think that's true, and it's not new, but I agree that it's clearly intensified since, let's say, the early 2000s. But I mean, you were at the Telegraph when the Barclay brothers were there, and also when they had the Spectator. That's an amazing story, by the way. It's like Succession now. You've got the kids fighting over the scraps, and a crazy story. You were there then. Was it obvious to you then, or did it take you a...
It was, because I resigned from the Telegraph.
Sure, but were you happy for a period under them, or did you see it getting worse? Or because obviously, Murdoch comes to the UK, I think, in '69 with News of the World.
Yeah, Murdoch. Yes.
Buys the Times in the '80s. It's not a wholly new phenomenon.
Yeah, and also, I think that you have to trace the history of this. Murdoch became super powerful under Blair. Thatcher kept him at arm's length. And in my view, for instance...
Hate having to agree with her. I really, really fucking do. But keeping Murdoch at arm's length could have been a lot worse if she actually brought him in, like Blair does later on. Oh. Obviously, she had other people advising her and shit like that, obviously. Was it 68, 69 that he came over here? Fucking hell. 10 years before I was born. Fuck. Fuck off back to Australia. Go on. Piss off. I think he's already balderized there. Fucking printing social media anyway. Fuck.
She wouldn't. She went down to the Sun once, I think. Talked to once, I think. And this decision by the Blair government, incoming Blair government in 1997, to fly all the way to Queensland and sort of pay obeisance, basically, doff their cap to Murdoch in 96, I think it was, attending a meeting of News Corps in crazy. And then if you look at the period after that, the unlimited access given to Murdoch executives in Downing Street, or Murdoch wherever he wanted to go, this created a new kind of politics. I document quite a lot of it in my book on Alistair Campbell, by the way, and it was new. John Major had not tolerated this, and that's one of the reasons they set out destroying him, I suspect, because he wouldn't play their game. And so you got something very new with Blair, which was then, of course, adopted by Cameron, and I can explain to you how that happened too. Which was something very new emerges, where the Parliament is effectively replaced by the media in 1997. The conventional role played by Parliament, i.e. where announcements are made on the floor of the House. They go to the front page of The Sun rather than made in the Commons, and a series of pathetic speakers have allowed that to happen. The government is accountable to the papers more than to their own MPs, who the figure at this moment in history of the chief whip is massively diminished. If you look back to those early TV dramas about politics, the big man is the chief whip. Suddenly, the big man becomes the press guy, the Alistair Campbell or whoever it is. Now, that becomes the new model of it. They are taken into government. Suddenly you get the press, the editors sitting alongside cabinet. A fantastic moment in early New Labour, when what's her name? Rebecca Brooks, I think. She's the editor of the Sun. She sits next to the cabinet in party conference speeches. She doesn't sit with the journalists. She's brought inside. And the News International parties become sort of must attend. Obviously, Cameron, to do him justice, tried to resist this when he first appeared, but it led to political disaster. He had an emergency moment in 2007 when his poll rankings collapsed, and he solves it by bringing in Coulson, the former editor of the News of the World, as his press advisor, and that changes everything. But he constructs policy in order to please the news, the Murdoch press, rather than to do the conservative thing. I mean, one classic example of this is treatment of Muslims.
Yeah, it was him and Maxwell.
Policy towards Muslims until 2007 was, you just look at what Cameron was saying and doing. He was saying we shouldn't use words like Islamism, we should treat.
Just look what that entire family has done. Just look at it. Obviously, before he took a tumble off his yacht. Christ, when was that controversy? I can't remember when that happened. That must have been in the 90s. I don't know. I don't know. So. Maxwell. Robert. Maxwell. Holy fuck. 91. Oh, Ian Robert Maxwell moniker. Jan Ludwig Hyman Benjamin Hoch. He's a Czechoslovakian. Fifth of November 1991 he died. Oh god, I completely forgot that. Oh Christ, I forgot that he's fucking buried in Jerusalem. Mine of Olives, might have guessed it. Ah, Pergamon Press. In 1991, his body was discovered floating in the Atlantic Ocean, having apparently fallen overboard from his yacht. He was buried in the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. Maxwell's death triggered the collapse of his publishing empire as banks called in multi-million-pound loans, essentially, that the guy took out. His sons briefly attempted to keep the business together, failed miserably, but failed as news emerged that Elder Maxwell had embezzled hundreds of millions from the pension fund of 4 different companies, if I remember correctly. The Maxwell companies applied for bankruptcy protection in 1992, so a few months after his death. After Maxwell's death, large discrepancies in his company's finances were revealed, including his fraudulent misappropriation of the Mirror Group pension fund. So he's basically stealing from his journalists and all the people who work for the Mirror Group. So an utter scumbag, essentially.
The Muslim community with great respect. Saeed Avasi was made a cabinet minister, a shadow cabinet minister, and then suddenly you get Coulson, and it gets harder. You get Murdoch. I don't want to attribute him. Coulson is the symbol of all this. You get it's done for Murdoch, and they start to turn on on minorities. Gove is given control, and Michael Gove, who's really. It's a very interesting phenomenon, Gove. He's absolute disaster from start to finish as a cabinet minister. But he always gets written up as absolutely brilliant.
God only knows why I got written up as brilliant. The man was fucking inept. His allegiance was to his homeland, Czechoslovakia, and here, Britain. The Czechoslovak army and the British army. Bloody hell! Got the military cross. And he got up to captain. After escaping Nazi occupation, he joined the Slovak army. It was during the Second World War and was decorated after active service in the British Army. In subsequent years, he worked in publishing, building up Pergamon Press to a major academic publisher. All those preprints you keep on hearing about, he was the one that first started doing that here in Britain, essentially. Then Elsevier bought him over. They've got all the ones that he actually brought in after wooing doctors and researchers and shit like that. That's why we have to pay for all our... We can either get them, which is that some of them are dross, essentially. That's where you get all your hydroxychloroquine, your ivermectin, all those ones. They were all promoted. You could all get them relatively cheaply, I guess. I wouldn't pay for them, obviously, because hydroxychloroquine is an anti-inflammatory. It's used for autoimmune diseases. People like me use it. Ivermectin is not for use in humans. Can't be using this. That's where all those preprints come from. They basically started in Pergamon Press. Fuck, I keep on forgetting that he had Macmillan Publishers as well. Huh. Military Cross, wow. Thanks for reminding me about that, Scribby. Cheers.
The best. When you saw the political obituaries written in, he was the minister for Murdoch, right? That's all he was, really. And so you can't do anything wrong. You're just written up as a genius because whatever he does is regarded with enormous acclaim. And so that is what happened. A new structure was created for British politics and the relationship with the media. And again, I return to Baldwin. They tried it out in early 1930s when the big media guys, Beaverbrook, tried basically to take over politics, and Baldwin made this, and they formed a new political party and tried to run against the Conservative Party, and Baldwin made his famous speech, power without responsibility is the prerogative of the harlot, that famous speech. And he said, clear out, get out of the way. Another reason why Churchill hated Baldwin, because, of course, Beaverbrook was his mate. But it was a massive moment. And Cameron could have done that. It's fascinating. And you look at missed opportunities in more.
I've got that one. Scribby. I've already read it. For people like me, I need these sort of things to have. Obviously, I've still got an insider, other side of the Atlantic, of course. Thank you, Homozygote. I love you so much. I can get all the ones that I'm still actually interested in. Obviously, I've still got my degree and stuff, so I can actually educate people about that as well. Basically boils down, vaccines are good, take them. And for the love of God, treat us like human beings.
Politics after the phone hacking. He could have used that to really take on Murdoch, but instead of which, he did that, the Tory party did that deal, and, there was never Leveson 2, and obviously they had to respond to the public outrage at, Millie Dowler, but they sorted for backstairs dealings with the big proprietors.
That's interesting, a genealogy of Tory collapse. And, that alternative timeline of, like you say, the phone hacking inquiry and Cameron maybe not hiring Coulson. I mean, I think that's quite an alluring argument. The point around Murdoch and Gove, maybe my memory doesn't serve me, but I think I'm correct in saying that the first interview with Trump after he became the president was in the Times, conducted by Michael Gove, who's a British politician. He used to be a journalist, but he's
And with Murdoch in the room. Yeah.
Precisely. And I think that was one of those moments where I thought, what on earth is going on?
Exactly. And that was a big moment. We're talking about the movement away from conventional conservatism, Burkean conservatism, to this new, very populist, dangerous, white supremacist conservatism. I'm trying to be very careful with my language. The conservatism of Donald Trump. And Murdoch, of course, was, through Fox News, was a massive figure in bringing about Trump in 2016. And nobody ever could say, all these pompous people who write for the Times, it's not an issue for them. All these, these worthy journalists who express these important thoughts on the column op-eds and so on.
Have you lost friends saying the things that you've said? Because obviously, like I said, this is your former employer with the Telegraph and with the Spectator. There must be many people who think, Peter, you've got this completely wrong. This is just how ideas and parties and politics develop. Things change, people change, and you're not responding to the times changing.
Yeah, well, I have lost a few friends. Yeah, I've but I got some. There are friends and friends, aren't there? I mean, one other point about the media world, right? Basically there aren't any friendships. They're all scratching each other's back, aren't they? Telling each other how wonderful, what a wonderful column you've just written, darling. This is the media world, yeah? And that's how it operates. And then if you fall out of favour, you're dumped. It's brutal. Politics has got a bit too much like that too. And so you've got to bear in mind there aren't any friends. It's about, in the end of the day, and so, because also there's this unspoken agreement, which I really find, it really annoys me. It did do right from the start, that you would never criticise one of your colleagues. There was a sort of standoff, wasn't there? No paper would ever criticise another paper, and no journalist would ever.
Maybe it needs people like me to be a journalist then. I'd have no problem calling out half of these bastards. I really wouldn't. Mind you, we do have Frankie. Might be a comedian, but his understanding of politics is absolutely top notch. Praise be Frankie Boyle. He is good. He is good dude. Hilarious as fucking dirty at times, but we can learn a lot from Frankie. Of course there's no fucking friendships in print media, Peter. You know that. You've been working in this sphere for the last 40 fucking years.
Expose the rotten practices of his or her colleague. And that continues. And so, again, that's when they all came together on phone hacking. It's a massive criminal conspiracy at the heart of Fleet Street. They all joined together. And then when Alan Rusbridger went, the new editor, whoever the editor was, obviously they just laid it alone. Obviously the Guardian decided, for whatever reason, it was going to leave that alone after Nick Davies and Alan Rusbridger went. And all the other groups all came together, to protect Murdoch, as the Guardian, I'm afraid.
So you've spoken highly of Rusbridger. Nick Davies, phenomenal. So what do you make of his replacement, Kath Viner? You don't sound particularly positive. Because this is the paper that the left looks to.
Well, what is tragic about, I don't know whose decision it was, but as editor, I would have thought you had some role in it, is to just not to leave phone hacking alone as a subject of interest. And, it's not gone away. If you've been reading Nick, there's this, if you read Prospect under Alan Rusbridger, and Nick Davies.
He's made it worth reading,
He really has. And it was a very interesting piece of journalism written by Alan Rusbridger the other day. And it was he read Nadine Dorries' book. Now, I haven't read that. I don't suppose you have.
I saw it in a charity shop on Saturday, but that's a different question.
But it contained one nugget of information from Nadine Dorries about the appointment of the next BBC, or was it the Ofcom chair? And some skullduggery, something irregular had happened inside Downing Street. And Alan Rusbridger just said, right, did this happen? And he went on this quest. And it's the almost perfect piece of political journalism because, he gets fobbed off. And gradually a picture emerges of how Britain has been run under the Conservatives, and it involves somebody called Sir Robbie Gibb, who's a governor of the BBC. I used to know him as a sort of rather indifferent producer. And he's now a governor in the BBC who established in charge of bias. Now, and this whole world, there's somebody else called Dougie Smith. You've never heard of Dougie Smith, nobody probably. But Dougie Smith he basically makes all the decisions about patronage. He hasn't even got apparently a role in government. Now, what he's exposed is this extraordinary world which we now live in and have been living in for the last 5 years, ever since Johnson became Prime Minister. And of course, none of this would ever get written about in the Times or the Telegraph or the Mail. It's just you have to get... And the Guardian has given up the ghost in this sort of stuff. It doesn't want to touch media because the stories are so harrowing. And so you really have to go to...
For fuck's sake, Guardian. You're meant to be doing this stuff, by the way, for Christ's sake. Can't believe I used to be a subscriber to The Guardian. Fucking hell. And Aaron's right, a lot of us lefties did used to look to The Guardian for decent coverage of shit. Not anymore. No point. No. Christ, we need better media. Fucking hell.
Sort of non-mainstream media to understand what's happening in this country.
You've said The Guardian doesn't want to go near media stories. You said earlier that The Guardian's political reporting, its political desk isn't very good. I wholly agree. I think it's appalling.
It's got a bit better lately. Pippa Crerar has made an improvement.
That's true. And I'm thinking really over the last
No, but there was a long period
years.
when they had made no effort to expose the Tory scandals.
No.
And I couldn't understand why not. That's what they should have been. Pippa Crerar, who, of course, played a major role at the Mirror. She was excellent at the Mirror and had gone to the Guardian. She has improved things a lot.
I buy that, but I suppose the question is, you're saying that The Guardian, and we're not putting the boot in The Guardian, but the point,
I'm just saying it should have been so much better.
Well, here's the thing. So you're saying that there's this big rightward shift in the whole of the British media. You've got this one outlier, which is The Guardian, and yet you're saying on the media, on the phone hacking, on the political reporting, it's been quite weak. And I just wonder, why is that?
Look, I never worked for The Guardian. I do occasional op-ed columns for them, but that's probably the last time I'm ever going to do that.
I'm sure.
But I don't know how it works. I can't give you any insight into the innards of The Guardian.
I just wonder about the whole, like you said, the media culture of a sort of fait accompli, where people don't scrutinise or hold one another to account, and that clearly goes beyond political ideology. Or maybe there are just very high costs. There are very high costs for The Guardian to, quote, go to war with the Telegraph, the Spectator, the Times.
I don't know. This is all speculation. What does worry me, looking ahead, because I was around when Tony Blair became Prime Minister, and basically the media went on strike, all of it. I mean, you couldn't write a negative word about Tony Blair for about 5 years until the Iraq War. It was very, very hard.
So when was it, what these dates are, like 96?
97 to 2002.
Right.
Well,
okay.
That when he was in power, and actually a little bit before, because the writing was on the wall that he was going to get it. And I hope that we don't go into a period of media sycophancy towards Starmer. I suspect that we will, you know. But we also, I still remember, and I'm scarred by the sycophancy towards Johnson for so long as Prime Minister.
Is it possible that the Liberal Democrats just become the sort of the centre-right party? Like people like Cameron, we've obviously criticised Cameron, but there's a Cameron prior to 2007 who's more in line with the kinds of conservatism you're talking about. Rory Stewart, for instance. Could they become that sort of centre-right party?
I don't think so.
I
think
so.
Cameron's busted.
Rory Stewart?
I think he's got this very unhealthy relationship with Alistair Campbell. I wish it wasn't so. he's rather overwhelmed in those conversations. It's very bad for Rory, and I think he was one of the most interesting figures in modern Conservative political history. I thought he was a fantastic cabinet minister, very wise and sensible.
So there's no realignment where you see sort of Labour on the centre, Lib Dems on the centre-right, and they're the opposition party.
I think it's too early to see what lies ahead for the Lib Dems. Their historical role, I don't think they don't know what they stand for, really. At the moment, it's a series of empty stunts which are much praised in the political press. But apart from that...
Final question. You've just said this is an era-defining election. I mean, people always say that about elections, but I think that's absolutely true with this one. When was the last time we had a general election as momentous as the one we're facing on July the 4th, 2024?
It's much more extraordinary. All that 1997 did was to reaffirm the Thatcher consensus. So it wasn't really a very important. 1978-9, that was important. It was it ushered in the era of neoliberalism. I think this election reminds me of 29. You have a new Labour leader coming in. It was Ramsay MacDonald then. And why I say 29, the Ramsay MacDonald, no fault of his, faced a double problem, one of which was immense geopolitical instability, and secondly, economic collapse, again, which started in the United States. And that economic collapse forced a split in his party. And he was rescued by Mr. Baldwin, who sort of basically ran his government for him for a while and then took over. But I think I think that Starmer, because he has not had the courage, or that he's been too strategic. He could have won this election with a fantastic manifesto to challenge the omerta imposed by the mainstream press. He could have taken on Murdoch. He could have said, "We're going to have a commission to look at how Brexit's gone." That's what he should have done. We're going to have a big commission and see what we should do. Momentous step taken by this country. How long ago? Almost 10 years ago. We're going to and taken on powerful interests. Instead of which he's played grandmother's footsteps. He's not really. He's sort of been so safe. And also he said, "We stand for." He should have really powerful speeches about the far right, about Islamophobia, and so on. But he hasn't. He's just trying to offend as few people as possible. So he won't have a mandate to govern. And so every time he does something serious, he'll be accused of, he has the majority, but not the mandate. He'll be accused of betrayal and lying. And of course, we know how he won the Labour leadership through a whole pack of lies about what he stood for. And then he actually fought the manifesto on the opposite. I mean, literally the opposite of what he told the Labour members 5 years ago. His fight. And then I dare say in government, he'll try and retrace his steps, but he's not going to have a lot of automatic support. He's not made the arguments, for why the Labour government is necessary. And that's, I think, an awful pity, and he'll come to regret it.
Peter Oborne, thanks for joining us here on Novara Media.
Thank you very much.
Now, having somewhat successfully established my press credentials, and because you and I have at least one thing in common, which is that all of us deal with language all the time, I thought it might be nice today for me to come to you with some of my language complaints. Certainly not to blame them on you, although, of course, you are implicated. And not that you can help it. I mean, the problem is really with the people you cover. The politicians, the celebrities, and the lawyers. And although their level of insincerity is astonishing, it's still kind of fun to hear them talk. In particular, it's fun to listen to Washington talk. Whenever the issue of term limits comes up, I always tell people the only term limits I'm interested in would be to limit some of the terms used by politicians. They speak, of course, with great caution because they must take care not to actually say anything. Proof of this, according to their own words, is that they don't actually say things, they indicate them. As I indicated yesterday, and as the president indicated to me, but sometimes they don't indicate, they suggest. Let me suggest that as I indicated yesterday, I haven't determined that yet. See, they don't decide, they determine. If it's a really serious matter, they make a judgment. I haven't made a judgment on that yet. When the hearings are concluded, I will make a judgment, or I might make an assessment. I'm not sure. I haven't determined that yet. But when I do, I will advise you. They don't tell, they advise. I advised him that I had made a judgment. Thus far, he hasn't responded. They don't answer, they respond. He hasn't responded to my initiative. An initiative is an idea that isn't going anywhere. When he responds to my initiative, I will review his response, take a position, and make a recommendation. See, they don't read, they review, they don't have opinions, they take positions, and they don't give advice, they make recommendations. And so, at long last, after each has responded to the other's initiatives, and each has reviewed the other's responses, and everyone has taken a position, made a judgment, and offered a recommendation, now they have to do something. But that would be much too direct. So instead, they address the problem. We're addressing the problem, and we'll soon be proceeding. That's a big activity here in Washington. Proceeding. They're always proceeding or moving forward. A lot of that goes on. Senator, have you solved that problem? Well, we're moving forward on that. And when they're not moving forward, they're moving something else forward, such as the process. We have to move the process forward so we can implement the provisions of the initiative in order to meet these challenges. No one has problems anymore. Challenges. That's why we need people who can make the tough decisions. Tough decisions like how much soft money can I expect to collect in exchange for my core values? So that I can continue my work in government. Of course, no politician would admit to such a lowly station as working in government, serving the nation. I'm serving the nation. Another favorite distortion is public service. I'm in public service. I like America, don't you? The food is great, but the public service is terrible. Now, folks, a question for you. Do you think it's possible that one of these politicians, whose judgment is so poor that he honestly thinks of himself as serving the nation, might occasionally be expected to indulge in a little patriotism? Huh? What do you think? Well, of course, not only is it possible, it's inevitable, and that's when he's at his very best. That's when he trots out the really good stuff all across this great land of ours. The greatest nation on earth, the greatest nation in the history of the world. And in times of military crisis, you can be sure that someone in a suit in this town will eventually plant himself in front of a camera and carry on a great deal about the most powerful nation on the face of the earth. Now, normally, during peacetime, the politicians will refer to people in the military as our young men and women stationed around the world. But in wartime, they quickly become our brave young fighting men and women stationed halfway around the world in places whose names they can't pronounce, wondering if they'll ever see their loved ones again. For added emotional impact, sons and daughters can always be substituted for men and women. And so I think we can sum this up by saying that where the military is concerned, the extent of a politician's insincerity can be measured by how far around the world our soldiers are stationed and whether or not any of them can pronounce it. Incidentally, another way of expressing this sentiment is to say we're sending our young men and women to places the average American can't find on a map. I've always thought it was kind of funny and somewhat out of character for a politician to go out of his way to point out the low level of American intelligence when indeed his very job depends upon it. It would seem to fly in the face of that other rhetorical standby of theirs. The American people are a lot smarter than they're given credit for. This is said with a straight face, although it is obvious, of course, that the proposition is being stated precisely backwards. But the politicians, God bless them, or something like that, they're at their most entertaining when they're in trouble. When they're in trouble, their explanations usually begin simply with words like miscommunication. What did you do wrong, Senator? Well, it was a miscommunication. Or I was quoted out of context. Better yet, and more ironic, they twisted my words. Such a nice touch. A person who routinely spends his days torturing the language complains, they twisted my words. Then, as the controversy continues to heat up, he moves.
To my lovely Americans in chat, I love you. You are amazing people. Thank you for being here. Two great nations divided by the same fucking language. Oh dear God. As I have always said though, English is absolutely garbage. And I pity anyone trying to learn it as a second language. Fuck that. I can barely speak it at times. And I was brought up here. And please don't try to get me to break down how Scots works either. Even trying to speak to other parts of Scotland are difficult for some of us.
To his next level of complaint, the whole thing has been blown out of proportion. It's always the whole thing. Apparently no one has ever claimed that only a small portion of something was blown out of proportion. Has to be the whole thing. That's because now he's feeling the heat. And so, as time passes and more evidence comes in, he suddenly changes directions and tells us, we're trying to get to the bottom of this.
Not quite. I'm nearly there. I'm so fucking close. I will get there. Trust me on that. I'm determined to get there before my 46th birthday, 10th of March, if anyone's curious. If you want to sub, if I'm affiliate by then, feel free. No obligation, of course, obviously. I'm not using this to make money. I don't need it. Well, I could do with it, but maybe to make this flat a little bit nicer looking. Nearly there. Nearly. I'm nowhere near becoming a partner on YouTube. I've only got 5 people. But that one's always going to be a tall order anyway. Keep on meaning to ask Helena how long it took her to become. Oh, thank you, Philippe. It's very kind.
Now he's on the side of law and order. It's jiu-jitsu, really. We're trying to get to the bottom of this so we can get the facts out to the American people. That's always a nice touch, American people. In fact, at this point, he might even say, I'm willing to trust in the fairness of the American people. Clearly, he's preparing us for something. And so, when finally all the facts come out and our subject seems quite guilty, he employs that sublime use of the passive voice, mistakes were made. Mistakes were made, don't look at me, probably someone in my office. Things are moving faster now. Mistakes were made is rapidly overtaken by there is no evidence. No one has proven anything. Eventually, I will be exonerated. I have faith in the American judicial system and that certain sign that things are closing in. Whatever happened to innocent
I'd rather she can't get it first, Grippy, actually.
Whatever happened? Well, he's about to find out. And we know this must be true because the next thing we hear from him is, I just want to put this thing behind me and get on with my life. I just want to put this behind me. That's an expression we hear a lot these days in all walks of life. from people in all walks of life. Usually the person in question has committed some unspeakable act. Yes, it's true, I strangled my wife, shot the triplets, set fire to the house, and sold my young son to an old man on the train. But now I just want to put this thing behind me. Get on with it. That's the problem in this country. Too many people getting on with their lives. I think what we really need more of is ritual suicide. You know? Never mind the press conferences. Get the big knife out of the drawer. Personally, what I want to do is I want to put this thing behind me and get on with my life, thing behind me and get on with my life. I'll repeat that for you. Personally, I want to put this thing behind me and get on with my life, thing behind me and get on with my life. And just to round out this section, let's hope there's a special place in hell reserved for those who have recently decided to take responsibility for their actions. That's the big thing now, taking responsibility for your actions, like it's a recent discovery. You know, he's taking responsibility for his actions. Well, isn't that wonderful? Ask him if he's willing to take responsibility for my actions, along with my alimony, my car payments, and my gambling debts.
Didn't it get much better? Long story short, the colony completely failed and now Scotland was broke. So
Right. What would anyone like? Fuck it, shall we? Sort of. Well, Super Hobby is still in a scratcher. Ooh. See what have I got. Go away. Oh. You want to know something? Let's cover that one. That one might actually be quite fun. Give me a minute. Who are you, my lovely Canadian? Oh, oops. Nope, nope. Not experts. Oh, there is it. Ah, is there?
Hey, it's Kay. And this is Skittles, Treasury Secretary. Neoliberalism, the ideological belief in the free market, in deregulation and reduced government interference. Or at least that's how it's typically discussed. Today we're going to explore an often overlooked aspect of neoliberalism that even many of its critics miss. To do that, we have to go back to what is commonly considered the beginning.
That cute ferret is called Skittles. She is amazing. She is lovely. There's the Cane Skittles Appreciation Hub. Give me a minute. Hang on a minute. Where away? Do. Oh, Scribby, you are a fucking legend. Thank you. Where away? Ah, there we are. Da. Da.
Of the neoliberal turn. Long before Clinton's market-based solutions to education and housing, even a few years before Reagan started arming Contras, in a putrid gray island nation that is known to historians only as the United Kingdom. In the 1980s, this wretched place was ruled by a great evil. Even today, its name is whispered in hushed tones, lest her specter be summoned. They say on a cool, quiet night, if you put your ear to the ground, you can still hear her, burning in hell. World War II, and you may have heard this, was a pretty bad time. In an effort to avoid a repeat of the severe depression and social unrest that followed the First World War, the British coalition government, headed by Churchill and Attlee, promised the development of a strong set of publicly owned services following World War II. This would be delivered by the following Labour government and included the NHS and a robust welfare system. This led to a sort of Keynesian mixed economy that is often referred to as the post-war consensus. This saw Labour and even Conservative governments tolerating trade unions at a level they had not before and never would again. In return, the Labour unions would play ball and not do anything too revolutionary. This strong labour movement combined with the aforementioned public investment led to rapid increase in living conditions for many as poverty rates plummeted from 18% before the war to an estimate between 4 and 9% by the 50s. Basically, this was the last time things were looking up for anyone except landlords on the British Isles. Thatcher's election in 1979 was in part a response to a series of economic crises that had defined the 70s, including a global stock market crash, a banking crisis, and an oil crisis. Her response to this economic instability was a simple one. The free market would get us out of this jam, but to free the market, we have to destroy the post-war consensus and suppress labor unions who are restricting the market with pesky inefficiencies like workers' rights. During Thatcher's reign, she would transition both the economic model of the UK, but also the ideological norms of the country towards neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is free market ideology. It holds that if we deregulate the market, it can and will solve our economic problems and lead to greater prosperity for all. John the Duncan, who makes a lot of great videos about neoliberalism, cites award-winning American economist Joseph Stiglitz, describing neoliberalism as
that grab bag of ideas based on the fundamentalist notion that markets are self-correcting, allocate resources efficiently, and serve
Bullshit.
the public interest well. It was this market fundamentalism that underlay Thatcherism, Reaganomics, and the so-called Washington Consensus in favour of privatisation, liberalisation, and independent central banks focusing single-mindedly on inflation.
John goes on to rightly point out a problem with the way Stiglitz characterizes neoliberalism. He is certainly criticizing neoliberalism in this article, which opens by saying, "History has not been kind to neoliberalism." But he does so in a way that makes a crucial mistake. And it's a mistake that is echoed by the helpful "What is neoliberalism?" explainers put out by the BBC and Harvard University that come up first if you search neoliberalism on YouTube. Both Stiglitz, the highly regarded academic, and these serious, well-resourced institutions are assuming that the rhetoric of neoliberalism necessarily lines up with the economic policy of neoliberalism, which wouldn't be a problem unless politicians weren't always completely honest with us.
You really think someone would do that? Just go on the
Parliament.
and tell lies?
Neoliberalism is best understood in two halves: ideology and economics. The small state, free market fetishizing narrative about neoliberalism that we see from Stiglitz and most mainstream discussions of neoliberalism is often treated as if it is its economic policy, when in fact it is its ideological policy. The idea that the market possesses an almost mystical capacity for self-correction and management, if only the darn state would stay out of its way, is an ideological statement. And ideology isn't for your leaders, it's for you. So why do I describe what many consider to be the heart of neoliberalism as ideological but not economic? Because neoliberal governments like Thatcher's do not actually shrink the state or follow a policy of non-interference in the market. Like the neoliberals who would follow her, Thatcher loved the state. In fact, Thatcher significantly expanded the police and security aspects of the state throughout her time in power. This was necessary in part to combat organized labor, from which she was attempting to strip crucial rights and protections. In addition, Thatcher's government maintained what Richard Woodward calls a dual industrial policy. This is the practice of rhetorically opposing state intervention in the market, while in reality intervening quite extensively. Thatcher's government actually subsidized key industries, including the automotive industry, which also featured a bailout of British Leyland to the tune of just under £1 billion, which, adjusted for inflation, is worth in 2022. The agriculture industry also received...
By the way, that's 5.5 trillion. So, a fuck ton of money.
Enormous subsidies, and in 1981, Thatcher defended the heavy subsidization of British farms after promising that the state would stop interfering in the market by stating that our farmers are being asked to compete not on equal terms, but against heavily subsidized competitors. We like equality now, Maggie. This is a very revealing statement. It is an admission that the fundamental argument that industry is at its best when unregulated and free of the state is incorrect. If left to their own devices, British agriculture companies would not have been able to compete with those of other countries operating on a more Keynesian model, where many are partially or entirely nationalized and subsidized with public money. That economic model simply competes more effectively. Keep that idea in mind for a little later. So, how did she get away with this? Taking every opportunity to extol the virtues of state non-interference in industry and using that firmly held belief to attack regulations on businesses and workers' rights, and then turning around and massively subsidizing private industry. That kind of hypocrisy should have been political self-destruction, surely. Well, she deployed a very clever trick that is known in the field of political science as lying.
You really think someone would do that?
Woodward's research into the spending of Thatcher's government found that while on paper industrial subsidy reduced during Thatcher's leadership, enormous sums of government spending were simply being categorized as something else. For example, billions of pounds of agricultural subsidy were instead classified as departmental research, advisory services, and administration. I'm completely serious. It's as simple as that. They just classified their subsidies as something else in the Treasury and said, look, we're spending less on subsidies. British journalists on social media are always announcing how important they are for holding power accountable and keeping the public informed. So it may surprise you to learn that this scandalous practice of misrepresenting state spending to give the appearance of a commitment to unimpeded free market policy went largely uninvestigated by the media at the time. There was and has continued to be a tendency to focus exclusively on official statements and not, what Thatcher's government actually did. Woodward described this as leading to a state-orchestrated masquerade, in which the very people who should have been criticizing the inconsistencies between Thatcher's ideological rhetoric and actual economic policy were instead complicit in it. Perhaps the extremely wealthy owners of our papers and news networks, who were no doubt ecstatic that the tide was turning against labor unions, had something to do with that. Remember, ideology isn't for them, it's for you. Thatcher is famously quoted as saying, "Economics are the method, the object is to change the heart and soul." Her neoliberal project
failed. We saw right through you.
was not just about selling off publicly owned industries while pumping money into the pockets of private industrialists, although that was one of her signature moves.
British Gas shares, they come out in November. If you see Sid, tell him.
Her project was about reorienting the way the people view themselves and their relationship to the state. The post-war consensus imbued the public with the idea that the state owes them. Regular working-class people fought in 2 world wars, rebuilt the country after both of them, and did all of the work that actually keeps the country running. It was justified for them to expect that the state in turn would look after them. This was the idea that Thatcher aimed to dismantle. By cultivating a sense that people are not members of a society in which they owe each other something, but sovereign, entrepreneurial individuals whose value is dictated by their personal financial achievements. The perception of state assistance and publicly owned services began to change. During the post-war period, welfare was seen by many workers as a victory. Their struggles in the labor movement led to a system where if a worker lost their job, was injured, or became ill and unable to work for long periods, the country that their labor had been propping up would have to look after them. They put in and they could take out when they needed it. But if people are not members of society, but individuals responsible for their own economic security, welfare becomes something shameful. A worker claiming welfare is no longer enjoying their hard-earned right as a worker. They are experiencing failure as an individual who has been unable to support themselves without state assistance. This led to a stigma around benefits, which, of course, has continued to the modern day. And this stigma spread throughout the public services. The state providing something for you became an embarrassment, a shameful thing. Unless, of course, you're a wealthy industrialist accepting millions in government grants. But by concealing the subsidization of private industry and demonizing public services used by the working class, Thatcher eroded solidarity among the working class and transformed many working people from class-conscious subjects who understood their position in society into temporarily embarrassed middle-class homeowners. With programs like Right to Buy, she touted homeownership as the ultimate expression of both success and security. Climbing the ladder to become middle class became the new avenue for a worker to improve their conditions, rather than unionizing and struggling for better pay and conditions with other workers. And she was quite successful at increasing the number of homeowners who would now have a personal economic incentive to support certain conservative policies, which she achieved again via government subsidy. She once again interfered in the free market to expand the homeowning population, a crucial step in ideologically shifting the British public towards neoliberal ideals. On the eve of the Thatcherite crusade, half of all workers were trade unionists. By 1995, the number had fallen to a third. The old industries associated with working-class identity were being destroyed. There no longer seemed anything to celebrate about being working class. But Thatcher...
Seriously, Elrond, there's fuck all they can steal from us. Seriously. The only things that I have that can be worth anything I am currently using. And even at that, this is a reconditioned laptop I'm using. It's only £180. 50 quid webcam, 50 quid microphone with condenser, 120 quid smartphone. Everything else is seen as vital. TV, DVD player, washing machine, chest freezer in our bedroom, larder fridge, one of the smaller fridges. They're all seen as vital. Cooker and microwave. They're all seen as vital. They can't take any of that off of us. We're even allowed furniture now. So there's fuck all they can take from us. They can take my DVDs if they like. But they're barely worth 10 pence each now anyway, because most people stream, can't quite afford to pay £15 a month. And for all the different things that we watch, I need to be doing 4 subscriptions a month. Disney, Netflix, Amazon and Apple TV. I don't have a spare 60 quid a month. My entire setup here is costing me about 50 a month. I've got other shit to buy. There is sod all they can take from us poors. There's basically fuck all. And there's people in worse positions than I am. There is nothing they can take from us. The only things we're going to be fucking losing are our bloody chains at this point in the game. Started a little bit late in the game, obviously. Still a mission to try and educate people.
Promised an alternative. Leave the working class behind, it said, and come join the property-owning middle classes instead. Those who failed to do so would have no place in the new Britain. Another way Thatcher's project was damaging ideologically is it instilled the idea in the public that capitalism and the state are diametrically opposed, that they are antithetical to each other, and as one grows, the other must therefore shrink. In fact, it is a direct byproduct of Thatcherism and the neoliberal turn that so many people who themselves have a fairly sophisticated understanding of capitalism and its problems still view anything other than full-blown libertarian free market economics as somehow hostile to capitalism as a system. Think socialism is when the government does stuff, when the reality is that capitalism needs the state for a great deal of important functions. The state is able to centralize military power and control a monopoly on direct force. Through that force, it is able to protect property rights, which is extremely important if your wealth comes from owning property.
One grey earth, welcome, my comrade. Welcome in. Great to see you. Thank you for dropping by. This is the lovely Kane Skittles. We love him. He is amazing. Going over how horrible Thatcher was, obviously. Bye! Slowly but surely I'm getting up to...
It also serves to discipline labor by breaking strikes, criminalizing undesirable behavior, and protecting you, the boss or landlord, from physical retaliation for your economic violence against your workers and tenants. And that's to say nothing of the capacity of the state to subjugate other economies for the...
Is that Galtieri? Oh, God. thanks, Elron. Is that finishy? Ugh. Nah. Her neoliberal fundamentalism ruined his country, and oh, fuck.
Enrichment of capitalists at home. We're going to free your economy, even if we have to murder and enslave you to do it. By obfuscating these aspects of the state's function, assisted by a deeply incurious media, by concealing the theft of billions of public funds which were funneled into the private sector, by insisting that they are shrinking the state while expanding its authority, the neoliberal politician is able to create an ideological environment where people can oppose the state, oppose all social programs, and associate those positions with greater social and economic freedom, all while supporting the armed aspects of the state which actually enforce a certain social and economic status quo, which reduce both personal and collective freedom, all while never feeling for a second that your views are contradictory. And that is the heart of a lot of modern conservative politics in the UK, the US, and beyond. In Tom Crompton's fantastic essay, Thatcher's Spiral, he lays out the way that Thatcher's political opponents not only sabotaged themselves, but contributed to her ideological process by making the mistake of accepting the premise of her politics. He describes how her opposition adopted her vocabulary, discussing things like labor market flexibility and optimizing labor market performance. Even if they're using these terms to suggest that Thatcher is underperforming in regards to these categories, it accepts the premise of the categories themselves, which is that workers are a commodity in the marketplace. He describes her opposition attacking her government for creating low consumer confidence, which accepts the premise that the reason we work is to consume. In fact, I did precisely this earlier in this video when I noted that Thatcher had to subsidize British farms because they couldn't outcompete other countries' agriculture industries. It's a point that highlights her hypocrisy and total ideological dishonesty, but it also kind of tacitly accepts the idea that the primary goal of the industry that grows our food ought to be competing in the market. The reason we shouldn't want our farms to be run by private interests is not because they compete more effectively when nationally run or funded, but because the production of our food should not be directed by the interests of a few incredibly rich landowners, who themselves will never want for food. Because our need to eat often contradicts the needs of the market, as seen in the metric tons of food destroyed every year because overproduction would drive prices down and crash the industry, while people are literally starving. Just as Thatcher's political opponents defeated themselves by accepting her ideological premises uncritically, if we wish to criticize and understand neoliberalism today, we cannot make the mistake of taking it at face value. Arguing against an ethos of privatization and small government is not a problem in and of itself, but doing so risks accepting the premise that this is the primary objective of neoliberal politics. While Thatcher and the many neoliberal governments around the world that followed her absolutely carried out privatization and deregulation, they aggressively used the state. The state is a tool, and it can be used to direct public money. That's taxpayer money and the income from publicly owned services into the hands of their friends. Neoliberalism is a project of theft. Theft of the services and money that we own, that we ought to control. And theft of our sense of self, our ability to see ourselves as human actors and not market commodities. And certainly the theft of resources from countries who cannot defend themselves from major powers. Neoliberal governments do not promote free trade, they promote their control over trade, especially through imperialism. They do not promote free association between workers and bosses, they promote greater control of bosses over workers. And they do not promote smaller government, they expand the aspects of government that exert control on you and me. When you strip away all the rhetoric about the free market and the cute pseudo-economics, that's the only thing you find in the black heart of neoliberalism. a ravenous need for control. No matter how many people have to die or how many governments we have to coup. So why on earth should our main arguments about neoliberalism be about the free market? What free market?
Oh.
Kids are bastards, but don't blame them. Yeah, they learn by example. Blame the folks who sold the future for the highest bid. That's right. Thatcher, fuck the kids.
Hey, it's Kay, and this is Skittles, my executive producer. Today we're going to talk about the new bad boys of British politics. That's right, it's those centrist heartthrobs, the Independent Group. Recently, Chuka Umunna, the leader, spokesman for the Independent Group, released a party manifesto. Not a manifesto, just a casual list that he personally wrote that happens to detail policies on many key areas a party would be expected to address. Totally different. But we'll come back to that totally not a manifesto later. First of all, let's take a look at what the Independent Group officially stands for. Which is,
all we can do is direct you to our website.
Sorry, Scrappy. Copy text. Do-do-do.
War is an easy thing to talk.
Oh, crap. Ay. Da-da-da-da. Da-da-da. Oh. Oh, please. Da-da-da-da.
War is an easy thing to talk about. There are not many people of the generation that remember it. The right honourable gentleman served with distinction. The last war, I never killed anyone, but I wore uniform. But I was in London in the Blitz in 1940, living in the Millbank Tower where I was born. Some different ideas have come in since. And every night I went down to the shelter in Thames House. Every morning I saw Dockland burning. 500 people were killed in Westminster.
Oh my God, look at Beardy Corbyn. Oh my God. Who's that? I don't recognise her. Christ, it's weird seeing Corbyn with so much hair. Wow.
One night by a landmine. It was terrifying. Aren't Arabs terrified? Aren't Iraqis terrified? Don't Arab and Iraqi women weep when their children die? Doesn't bombing strengthen their determination? What fools we are to live in a generation for which war is a computer game for our children and just an interesting little Channel 4 news item. Every member of Parliament tonight who votes for the government motion will be consciously and deliberately accepting the responsibility for the deaths of innocent people if the war begins, as I fear it will. Now, that's for their decision to take. But this is a quite unique debate in my parliamentary experience, where we're asked to share responsibility for a decision we won't really be taking, with consequences for people who have no part to play in the brutality of the regime which we are dealing with. And I finish with this. On October the 24th, 1945, and the...
That would have been... Christ, when would that have been outside the South African embassy? That would have been a good few years before this, actually. This was 98. Oh my God. Has it been 11 years since he died? Oh. God, I miss this legend. I absolutely fucking miss him.
Former Prime Minister from Bexley Old Sidcup will remember it. The United Nations Charter was passed. And the words of that charter etched into my mind and move me even as I think of them. We, the people of the United Nations, determined to save future generations, succeeding generations, from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has caused untold suffering to mankind. That was the pledge of that generation to this generation, and it would be the greatest betrayal of all if we voted to abandon the Charter and take unilateral action and pretend we were doing it in the name of the international community. And I shall vote against the motion.
Oh no, I thought you were about right there. No, it was 84. It was 15 years before. That was 98. It was 84. Wow. Good for him. 84. Wow. Yeah, I thought it was about the late 70s as well, maybe early 80s, not the mid 80s. Yeah. Well, that apple fell completely far away from the tree then, didn't it? Doctor. Kind of, I was going to say kind of decent, but in retrospect, probably not now, looking at him. Yeah, he's nothing like his dad. Nothing like him at all. You would have thought he would have rubbed off a little bit on him, I bet. Apparently not. Oh well. Do-do-do. Do-do-do-do-do-do. What was your other one, Scrippy? I would have let him have been more like his dad. Oh. Hmm. Christ, Robin Cook. How long is that one, actually? 15 minutes.
The reality is, that Britain is being asked to embark on a war without agreement in any of the international bodies of which we are a leading partner.
From the very moment that he stood up, you could sense a change in the atmosphere. People were hanging on every word.
We cannot now pretend that getting a second resolution was of no importance.
Like a martial artist, he was using his opponent's strength against them.
Then for this House to stop the commitment of troops in a war which has neither international agreement nor domestic support.
You know, it was a moment that carried enormous significance, authority and emotion.
It is for that reason, and that reason alone, and with a heavy heart, that I've resigned from the government.
The year is 2003. Britain is preparing to go to war with Iraq as an ally of the United States. Robin Cook is considering his options of whether to stay in government and deciding ultimately that he's unable to stay in the absence of a UN Security Council resolution authorising war. The speech for me really started when I happened to bump into Robin Cook at a reception in Westminster, actually just literally a stone's throw from where I'm standing now, and this would have been in January 2003. I'd worked with him at the Foreign Office until 2001. So I obviously knew him very well. I'd worked for him for a total of 7 years in opposition and then in government. We bumped into each other at this reception, and it was pretty clear from what he was telling me that he was uneasy about the rush to war with Iraq, which was at that moment gathering pace. I made an appointment to see him in February of the following month. I went for
Yeah, okay, back to my channel, to the manager. There we go. Okay, we'll go over to the one that's confirmed.
I've written about this in The Spectator, so I may as well say it to his face. Tony Blair shadowed me when I was Employment Secretary, when I was Home Secretary. In all my dealings with him in those years, he was absolutely straight, he was absolutely straightforward. I have no complaints. I think that's the man who's responsible for what's changed. I think I think the way in which Alistair has conducted his operations when he was in Downing Street, when he bullied and lied his way across our political life consistently, did more to lower the tone of our political life, our public life, than anything else. And that was all, of course, done with Tony Blair's connivance and authority, so Tony Blair has to bear the ultimate responsibility for it.
I know it's Michael's view. I think it's very sad he thinks like that. I think a lot of it is down to the fact that he's one of the handful of Tory leaders that Tony Blair saw off. I'm actually not going to respond to the point about lying, Michael.
No, I thought it long before I was ever leader of the party, as you know. And what Alistair's done has been very well documented. Peter Rayborn has written a book about it. As far as I'm aware, Alistair hasn't taken any action against it.
I haven't even read it.
It's been very well documented, time after time.
I think one of the reasons, I think the Tory party have got a real problem, and it's why ultimately, though Cameron is a new leader and he's trying to change it, they're in complete denial about why they lost. They think it was won by people like me. It was won because Tony Blair was an exceptional political leader.
Look, I've paid tribute to
Tony Blair was a lying, duplicitous, oily bastard. Can't believe I fell for the bastard. Ugh. I was young, and I thought, least of all the evils, because I did believe that back then when I was younger, that the SNP were basically the tartan Tories. They weren't. They really weren't. It wasn't until 3 years later when I met an absolute legend of the SNP, Annabel Ewing. She is from my neck of the woods up in Perth. I love the woman. I love her. The only reason they actually said that is because Alex Salmond was the chief economist of RBS, and he always seemed a little bit capitalist-y, kind of. But I fell for Blair, unfortunately, thinking he would actually do well for all of the country, including my own one. Feel foolish now, obviously.
His political skills, and he deserves great credit for the way in which he changed the Labour Party, for the way in which he won 3 general elections. But I think it is indisputable that the tone and standards of public life in this country have deteriorated radically in those 10 years, and I think you bear a heavy share of the responsibility for that.
Well, I'm happy to take your criticisms, Michael, but I'm afraid I think a lot of it is the fact that sour grapes, the fact you lost.
I think there's something
He hasn't
else
been
that
there for
works
5.
here.
How long ago did you quit?
I think it'll take Michael a long time to get over defeat. I'm sorry, Michael.
No,
Jeremy's right.
It's really nothing to do
It's
with
nearly
defeat.
4 years since I left, Michael. Get over it.
Yeah, the rot had set in.
Now, having somewhat successfully established my press credentials.
Okay.
I've written about this in the Spectator.
Okay, people. I've been hearing my super hubby bang about a bit. Let's see who's going live. I think she is. Is everyone okay with going to raid our lovely foxy friend Adrian? Oh, bye everyone. See you later. Great having you all. Thank you for being here. I'll be streaming later tonight. So, well, Sunday going into Monday, so midnight to 1ish, or hopefully before 3 a.m. Hopefully. So hopefully between 12 and half 1. Okay, so good few hours. So rest up, take care, enjoy your Sunday.